Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo der Platz genossen ist. Weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst kommt, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist. Weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst kommt, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist. Weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst kommt, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday, the first Socialism Saturday of 2024. We have officially made it into season 3 of Socialism Saturday. I probably should update the intro music, but did anyone else miss that song? I've grown to love that song. Communist music, love them or hate them, communist music is pretty great. Socialism Saturday is a stream that I do every Saturday at 6 p.m. on YouTube, on Rumble, on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, where we watch the farthest of the far left, the most dystopian of the dystopian, the people that no one else on the internet is showing you guys. And we do this for the express purpose of learning what the left is doing, how they're doing it, how they have implemented every single crazy idea in the world today. If you want to know where critical race theory in schools comes from, it comes from the people we watch on Socialism Saturday. If you want to know where gender ideology comes from, it comes from these people. If you want to know where abolish the police come from, it comes from these people. If you want to know where attacks on parental rights are coming from, it comes from these people. Every single crazy thing that the influencers on Twitter read about every single day comes from these people. And yet none of them actually show you the root source of the problem. But that's what we do. And we watch it in their full form. I'm not Libs of TikTok. I don't show you clips of the most outlandish bullshit that most of the time isn't even real. What we do is we watch their full form training. We watch their classroom presentations. We watch their conferences. Sometimes I even go to their conferences, whether they like it or not. We watch the whole thing from start to finish. We watch the boring bits. We watch the cringy bits. And because we sit here and we do the work, we know more about what the left is doing than anyone else on the internet. I would match my knowledge and the knowledge of people that have come to Socialism Saturday every single time since the beginning against anyone else on the internet in terms of knowing what the left is doing, how they're doing it, pragmatically in the real world. These are not philosophy papers that were written 100 years ago by dead people. These are not essays that they found in some obscure academic journal that no one has actually read. These are real classes, real trainings, real organizing efforts that are going on right now in the real world. They put all of their stuff on the internet. All we need to do is find them and then watch them and then pay attention. So today we have to kick off 2024 right. We have to do it with a little style, a little pizzazz. And so there is no better person to kick us off for 2024 than the Abolish the Family Goddess, our ginger dragon, our socialist queen, Sophie Lewis. Longtime viewers of Socialism Saturday will be deeply familiar with Sophie Lewis because I have covered more of Sophie's work than anyone else on the internet. You're welcome, Sophie. Sophie Lewis has written 2 books about abolishing the biological nuclear family. Sophie currently works at the University of Pennsylvania. Yeah, that University of Pennsylvania. Sophie is one of those people, one of the crazy leftist activists that is actually in favor of Hamas. She has signed on to public statements to that effect. We love Sophie because Sophie says the quiet part out loud all the time. And actually, you know what? Despite my better judgment, I actually have grown to have quite an affinity for Sophie. I feel like I understand Sophie. Sophie will sometimes talk to me over Instagram DMs every once in a while, not all the time, because Sophie doesn't want anyone to believe that we're in solidarity. We are not in solidarity. But I do have a strange affinity for her. And so I'm happy to kick the year off because Sophie, back in August, this is a relatively new thing, gave a lecture at the Bemis Center. Does anyone know where the Bemis Center is? The Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts. Now, people think that these socialists, they're just in like the big cities, right? They think they're in New York or Philadelphia, where Sophie's from, or Seattle or Los Angeles or Portland, Oregon, right? They think that socialists are just doing these things in big cities. The Bemis Center, where this presentation took place, I'll scroll down to the bottom of their website, is in Omaha, Nebraska. So this ain't no big city thing. I've been to Omaha, Nebraska. It ain't that big of a city. In addition to this being at a contemporary arts center in Omaha, Nebraska, it is also supported by the University of Nebraska at Omaha. So don't think for 1 second that this isn't happening in red places, guys. Your taxpayer-funded university in Nebraska is paying for socialists to come and give lectures at your arts centers. This is going to be a crazy one, too. Like, is there anyone new for Socialism Saturday? Like, if you're new for Socialism Saturday, this is going to be, we're doing some advanced socialism tonight. I'll just tell you that this is going to be, I can already tell this is going to be one of those more flowery presentations where it's really like advanced socialism level. But let me just read you the description. Oh, Greg is here. Greg is here for the first time. Welcome, Greg. I will have some words of wisdom for all the newcomers soon. This video only has 32 views. It was uploaded in August of last year. These are my favorite types of videos to watch because it means that we are basically the only people on the internet watching this video. The title of the presentation is What Goes Around Comes Around. Fleshy Toxicities Return Home as Kin. Welcome, OPC. OPC comes from the Thorpe crowd. We're not talking about the Thorpes anymore, for reasons that I'm sure you guys are going to hear about at some point relatively soon. But welcome. Bill is relatively new. Yeah, we'll all have some advice for newcomers in a second. So here is the description. You guys are going to love this. Feminist critic and scholar Sophie Lewis critically explores the intersection of biopower and hospitality by focusing on surrogacy as a practice that entangles property, labor, environment, and kinship. That means nuclear family. Anytime you guys hear kinship, that means nuclear family. In dynamic ways. Sophie is joined by Jean Amora, who is responding to her lecture and offering insights born of her work as a clinical practitioner and medical educator. Check out this first sentence. You guys, for people who've been around for Socialism Saturdays, here, I'll make this even bigger so people can see it. You guys are going to die over the first sentence in this description. Living human fetuses conceptualized as genetically authored private property are among the many commodities whose manufacture can now be outsourced to the global South under capitalism. Can we just take a moment with this first sentence? So we're talking about surrogacy in South America. I may have the global South. The global South is the southern hemisphere. So we're in the global north. The global south is going to be like the southern hemisphere, so South America, essentially. Living human fetuses are considered to be private property. We know where that comes from, right? Because the socialists believe that the nuclear family upholds capitalism as a form of like private property. Your kids are private property, and it is their job to liberate the children from being the private property of their adult supremacist parents by getting rid of the nuclear family. And they're doing that because they want to abolish capitalism. But this one sentence has everything in it. Living human fetuses conceptualized as genetically authored private property. So they are explicitly telling us that they believe that children under capitalism are considered to be private property, are among the many commodities whose manufacture can be outsourced to the global South under capitalism. Kind of sounds like a fetal slave trade. Yeah. Well, they do believe, socialists believe that because children are the private property of their parents under capitalism, they very literally believe that children are slaves to their parents under capitalism. That's why they need to get rid of all parental rights. This is explicitly, guys, this is where attacks on parental rights come from, because they believe that as long as parental rights exist in this country, that children are very literally the slaves of their parents because they are oppressed under adult supremacy. One of the locations where commercial gestational surrogacy production occurs, as it happens, is India, an area synonymous with a giant gas leak. As environmentalists attempted to make known throughout the 1980s and 90s, the so-called, I don't know how to pronounce that, India disaster was inflicted on the population by the Union Carbide Corporation, a subsidiary of Dow Chemical. Okay, so what this says, this is so great. What this says is that a capitalist corporation was responsible for a giant chemical leak that harmed the population. So they're saying that capitalism is responsible for all environmental damage because of the profit motive that inherently comes with capitalism. When they say outsourced, they mean surrogacy. Good question. Today, as feminist neuroscience scientist Debolina Roy has shown, the poisonous but something gas leak had an effect on the population. I'm not going to read all that. So let's get down to the questions. Okay, so we're going to start here. Hang on. No, we're going to start here. It is making its way back to the global north via the bodies of Suro babies commissioned by European and American parents. Okay, I think I'm understanding this. So Sophie is arguing that this gas leak that was caused by capitalism continues to have an effect on the reproductive biology of women in India, and that effect is making its way back to the global north via the bodies of Suro babies commissioned by European and American parents. That means capitalist parent. What can this circuit of historic this is why we love Sophie. Only Sophie would come up with such a flowery term as molecular violence, whereby toxicity is returned to its place of origin through the labors of gestating Indian babies, tell us about the vengeful dimensions of hospitality. How might we think with, against, and beyond the category of kinship, that means nuclear family, with our toxic cyborg children and their poisoned mothers? There is no better way that we can kick off Socialism Saturday than with what is obviously going to be a very word salady, just amazing, cringe, everything leftist presentation all rolled into one. Like we have reached peak dystopia, and it's only January 6th. Happy January 6th, everyone, by the way. I hope everyone's having a great day. I hope all you insurrectionists are keeping it together today. Sophie Lewis is a visiting scholar at the Alice Paul Center for Research on Gender and Sexuality at the University of Pennsylvania and a member of the teaching faculty at the Philadelphia branch of the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research. Jean Amora is professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Nebraska and director of Nebraska's Medicine's Early Pregnancy Assessment Clinic and the Gender Care Clinic. Developed by the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Again, the University of Nebraska at Omaha is what's sponsoring this. So guys, that is what we are watching today for Socialism Saturday. Now, this is going to be a bit of a longer presentation. I think it's almost 2 hours long. So I do hope everyone has a drink and a snack. Hey, Rachel, haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. I have a very interesting beer tonight for my first beer. It's a sweet potato casserole beer. It's from Magnify Brewing Company. Hang on, I'll show you. I'm kind of confused and scared at the same time. It's called Grandma's Famous Recipe Sweet Potato Casserole Sour Ale from Magnify Brewing. Magnify usually does a good job, but I'm a little scared about that beer. Anyway, before we get into it, a couple other orders of business. Number one, hang on. There we go. Please make sure you are subscribed to my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. This is where I post all of my best Unwoke content on the internet. This is actually my content hub. Contrary to popular belief, it's not YouTube. YouTube shadow bans my content to high heaven. Substack does not shadow ban my content. I post clips from my videos over on Substack. I post written articles breaking down the woke ideology. If you head over there right now, you're going to be able to access the next, the second article I put out this year in the Woke 101 series, which is an explicit explanation of why whiteness means capitalism. I created this little document that you can download, print off, and study. And this explains explicitly for anyone who needs it why whiteness means capitalism. Guys, this is the number one thing that you can wrap your head around, because the left uses the same vocabulary as us, but they use different definitions, and this is purposeful. They have a completely different language. Part of the reason we watch Socialism Saturday is to learn the language of the left, to become fluent in socialist, and this is the number one concept that people have to wrap their head around. If you don't yet understand why whiteness means capitalism, if you can just get your head around this using this really simple breakdown, ask as many questions as you want. Once you understand this, learning the rest of socialism will become so much easier for you. It really will. This is it. Like, you have got to set aside your notion that the term whiteness, white supremacy, racism, all that stuff is about skin color. because it has nothing to do with skin color at all. It only has to do with capitalism, which they define explicitly as private property ownership. Okay? I know this is a dream that so many people don't want to let go of. Everyone wants to think it's about skin color, but if you can just you are not seeing things as correctly as you could be if you do not understand this. Okay? This is the cornerstone of socialist doublespeak. And once you hit this, you're going to find out they're doing so much more crazy shit than you even can dare dream, and a whole world will open up to you. DW says, remember to check your subscription status on the YouTube channel. I just got unsubscribed again. Yeah, guys, people get unsubscribed from my YouTube channel like every single day. So if you want to be subscribed, please make sure you are. Because that's YouTube gonna YouTube, man. That's one of the things you can find over on the Substack right now. Now, you can subscribe for free, but if you want to support the work I'm doing and keep me in business, because I am 100% funded by you, please sign up for an $8 a month or $80 a year subscription. You get access to a variety of perks, to include 2 Zoom calls with me every single week, to include the supporter Discord, to include movie nights that we do in the supporter Discord. Tomorrow, we are watching Arachnophobia. This is Jennifer January. Jennifer is the hostess of movie night. I didn't pick out this movie. I'm afraid of spiders. And so I'm not exactly pleased with this. It's actually a really good movie. It's a good movie. I've seen it before. I'm not going to scream out of the room or anything. I'm just saying I didn't pick this out. I hate spiders. I always have to get a man to kill spiders when they're around. I scream like a girl. Anyway, it is Jennifer January because Jennifer's birthday is in January, so she gets to pick out all the movies for movie nights and show all her favorite movies. So we will be watching Arachnophobia at 8 p.m. tomorrow in the supporter Discord, and that is one of the things you get when you become a paying supporter on my Substack. Tayton, thank you for the super chat. I've been wrestling with this one in my head. Have you heard them refer to capitalism as a system that owns its citizens and youth? Like citizens are private property of capitalism, and therefore we want liberation? Well, yeah. They view all of us to be oppressed under capitalism. Yeah, I mean, this is what they're talking about when they're talking about parental rights. They're not just liberating the kids from their parents. They're liberating the kids from the oppressive system of capitalism. So yeah, that's exactly right, Tayton. I appreciate the super chat. Another thing you can do if you want to support the work I'm doing is to head over to the Unwoke Art Store, which is unwokeart.com. There's lots of cool stuff in the Unwoke Art Store and a couple specials and limited edition things that I want to tell you about. So you can always go over here. You can find t-shirts, mugs, like hoodies, all this stuff. I do have a couple limited edition items. Number one is I was convinced to use the recently decopyrighted Mickey Mouse image to make my own version of that. This is a limited edition design that is only going to be available through the end of January. You've got Mickey Mouse saying whiteness is capitalism. Limited edition designs, once they're gone out of the store, they may never come back. Maybe they will for a special, but maybe they won't. You don't want to take a chance. If you want the limited edition design, you can get it on all sorts of stuff: t-shirts, hoodies, bags, tank tops, stickers, mugs, all that stuff. And that is only going to be available through the end of January. We've also got, of course, the Be an Anti-Hero t-shirt. Now, the Plague Doctor designs that I'm going to show you, these are 24% off right now until the end of the day tomorrow. So only like another day or so to get these if you want them at 24% off. This is the Be an Anti-Hero design. This is a signature design in the store. You can get that on all sorts of things. I've also got the limited edition Unwoke Wiki design, which I'm going to tell you more about next week. And this has a different Plague Doctor on the front, and the Socialist Revolution is real graphic on the back, which I just think looks cool. And this is actually a limited edition, and it's only going to be available through the end of the month as well. And then we're going to do a new one after that. So you want to pick those up this weekend because, like I said, they're 24% off right now, but that only lasts through the end of the day tomorrow. I've also got a new series I'm going to be launching in the store called the Artisan Collection. This was inspired actually by Tayton. So thank you, Tayton. You can't see this, but these are a bunch of hammer and sickles raining down on a little bourgeois lady. It's a little bit more of a fancy design. And then on the back of this, it says the socialist revolution is happening all around you. So it's a nice little like billboard that you can wear walking around. I don't know. I think this is kind of cool. Take a look at it up close with this design. I just think it's like fun and whimsical and all that stuff, except it's still sending a message about socialism. And then of course we have the real Marxism sweater. I am wearing this right now. These are so cozy and so comfy, and they look good in red. I love the Real Marxism design. The Real Marxism design is my favorite design in the Unwoke art store. You can get these in red or black, also t-shirts, hoodies, all that good stuff. There it is in black. It also looks good in black, but I like the red one. It's pretty sick. Anyway, all purchases from the Unwoke art store do go to support the work I'm doing, and I really, really do appreciate it, guys. Let's see. Just found out California is giving Medi-Cal healthcare to undocumented people, which includes gender affirmation surgeries. Yeah, that's nice of California, isn't it? And then Amelia, thank you for the super chat. Anytime I've used this language when talking to a socialist, abolishing private property, whiteness means capitalism, they get very, very, very angry. Well, that's part of the point, isn't it? Because one of the reasons that I get banned from socialist events, when all I do when I go to socialist events is I sit there and I listen. Literally all I do is I sit there and I listen. I don't cause problems. I don't use hate speech. I don't argue with anyone. I don't use pronouns that aren't the approved pronouns. I just go and I sit there and I listen. But there is nothing that socialists hate more than people like us understanding their language, because they know they're speaking encoded language. They know that they are using different definitions for the terms than we are. They love it when conservatives misunderstand their language. They love it because that means they can use it against them. But we don't do that shit. We know what they mean. And when you say to them that you want to abolish all private property and whiteness means capitalism, they get pissed because they know that we've seen through their game. That's how you trigger them, guys. As soon as you bypass the conservative talking points, they legit don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with us. They really don't. This is why I don't allow this hate speech bullshit in my chat. And what I mean by, like, we don't rip on trans people. We don't rip on non-binary people. We don't say anything about kids. We don't do any of this. We don't talk about gay people. We don't do any of the things that we don't talk about, like how white people are oppressed victims of the world, because they're not. We don't do that here. And because we don't do that, they are actually more afraid of people like us than they are of the conservatives. This is why it's important to know their language, guys. They don't know what to do when people see through their language. This is one of the ways we can throw them off kilter. You guys, I hear all the time, conservatives always say, Carlin, you don't want us to fight back. No, I do want you to fight back. I want you to fight back smart. I want you to fight back in a way that's actually going to make a difference, not continue to react to them, which is what they want you to do, because they know how to deal with you guys when you react to them. They don't know how to deal with this. All the identity crap is a distraction. Just cut to the chase and start arguing via use of force or economics. They don't know what to do when you know their language. All right, before we dig into the presentation, I just have a couple parameters for people who are new here. Again, I want to welcome everyone that's new to Socialism Saturday. But we do have some rules. Okay? We have rules here. This is not a normal stream. You are sitting in a class, and the purpose of that class is to teach you how to speak socialist. I am the teacher of the class. You are in my classroom. No one has to be here. If you don't want to learn how to speak socialist, you don't have to be here. If you don't like the way I teach, you don't have to be here. But if you're going to be in my classroom, you're going to follow my rules. Okay? So the purpose of what we are doing is to learn the coded language that socialists use. They may use the same vocabulary as us. They are not using the same dictionary. In understanding their language and in listening to these presentations where we are immersing ourselves in their language, they're going to say a lot of crazy things. And your inclination is going to be to try to debunk them. You're going to say, that's not what that means. That sounds really stupid for reason X, Y, B, and Z. Our purpose here is not to debunk them, because debunking them does no good. Debunking them does not change anything, and debunking them only distracts us from learning what they are actually saying. You can listen to someone and understand what they mean without agreeing with them. I am not asking you to agree with them. I am asking you to understand them, and every ounce of energy that you spend trying to debunk them is an ounce of energy that you could be putting towards understanding them, when there's going to be no victory from debunking them. They're not here right now. They can't hear us, okay? If you have questions in the chat, then please ask them. I will answer as many questions as I can. People in the chat will answer as many questions as they can. And I only want good faith questions, guys. If you're new, especially if you're new, please ask questions. I don't mind answering the same question over and over again, except for longtime viewers who have come into the chat every single week and asked the same goddamn question every single week. Because if you're doing that, I'm going to remember you. Okay? So I have a different expectation for people who are new than I do for people who have been here for a long time. So just keep that in mind. But I want to welcome all questions. And when we answer your questions, guys, listen, and this is another problem. Like, when we answer your questions, I hate to be this much of a bitch, but don't fucking argue with me. Don't argue with me. Don't argue with other people in the chat. Because here's what happens. People come in and they ask questions, and that's good. And then we give them an answer that is different from what their conservative influencers have told them. And then they fly off the goddamn handle and they start arguing with me and they start arguing with the chat and they get disruptive. Guys, I'm not going to give you the same answers the influencers are, because the influencers don't know what they're talking about. We are trying to help you learn, but every time you argue with us, it becomes really disruptive. So again, you don't have to be here, okay? Lastly, normal rules of the chat do apply. Number 1, don't be a dick. You will not insult me. You will not insult other people in the audience. I can do whatever I want because you're in my house right now, but you do not have free license to do whatever you want in my house. Number 2, no whining. If you hear something you don't like, you got to keep your feelings to yourself, man. Whining is distracting, it's annoying, and it doesn't create an environment where most people can learn. So just keep it to yourself. I don't want to hear it. All right, with all that out of the way, let's dig into our presentation, shall we? Guys, please go ahead and mount that like button for me. There is, as usual, a shocking disparity between the number of people watching right now and the number of people who have mounted that like button. Again, this is going to be a little bit of a longer presentation. It's going to be a little bit more complex than I think we're used to, but we're going to make it through. And let's just prepare ourselves for Sophie using some flowery language, because that's just what Sophie does. And note, we only vote on beer on Friday, Tayton, so we are not voting on beer today. Everything good now? I'm increasingly convinced the only good Bens are those who I'm not going to talk a lot about this. The too long didn't read is that Ben Thorpe there's a restraining order now. So he can't come within 2,000 feet of me, according to a judge as of yesterday. And that's all I'm going to say about it. I want him to stay away. I don't want to talk about the Thorpes. I don't want to be involved in any of this bullshit. And my husband just went in and bought some hollow point bullets just in case. So everything is fine, and I would really prefer if no one brought up the Thorpes and we can just move on. All right? Thank you. All right, let's get this party started. Thank you so much. Look, still wearing a mask. This was a couple months ago.
Hello? Just want to make sure that's working. Hello, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for Dr. Sophie Lewis's lecture, What Goes Around Comes Around, Fleshy Toxicities Return Home as Kin.
I think the sound gets
Jared
better.
Packard. I'm the exhibitions manager here at the Bemis Center. And before we begin, I want to draw your attention to
I'm turning my mic
fun
down, so
upcoming events we have
you guys
going
can turn
on.
your volume up.
This Saturday, we'll be flinging open our doors to the public for our open house, open studios. This is a moment for the Omaha community to get a peek into our upstairs, our residency spaces. And so some of our residents will have their studios open. You'll be able to have conversations with them and understand a little bit more about what goes into our residents' art practices. As part of that event, we will wrap it up at 4 o'clock after an afternoon of studio visits with a performance by our exhibiting artist, Bridget Moser. When I am through with you, there won't be anything left. I am very much looking forward to this. I hope you join us. For those of us watching us remotely, this will be streamed, so please plan on RSVPing and attending that. On March 9th, on Wednesday, we'll be hosting Public Assembly, Bodily Autonomy, Part 2. This is a moment for us to connect the themes of the exhibition to the what's happening in Omaha's social, political, and artistic landscape, and it's facilitated by two activists, artists, and community members, Denise Chapman and Jamonte Watson. And as another part of our ongoing lecture series, of which tonight is one, Deidre Cooper Owens, Slavery's Hospitality and the Extraction of the Black Body on March 17th at 7 p.m. This will also be a streamed event, so please plan on I'm looking at you joining us on Zoom. Please plan on joining us for that. And before we get into tonight's event, I just want to give a special shout out to all of our sponsors who, of course, we're very grateful for making this happen, this exhibition, and all of our wonderful programming. This is what allows us to keep everything free, which is a core of our mission here at BMS. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here online to the third lecture of our four-part series entitled Flesh It Out, The Body, Hospitality, and Their Material Entanglements. This innovative program was initiated by a curator, Sylvie 14, as an integral part of the exhibition, I Don't Know You Like That, The Bodywork of Hospitality, and developed in collaboration with UNO Medical Humanities, Ded Kozer Center of Health Humanities, and more specifically, Steve Langan, Dr. Amy Morris, and Dr. Joseph McCaffrey, with their input of many others. These kinds of collaborations are really important for sparking
I always get sent Omaha steaks, and they're delicious. I don't care what anyone says.
And helping us understand our respective fields in new ways, with new eyes. So I'd also like to give a shout out to my colleagues, Davina Schreier and Alexander Hamilton, who are making tonight's events look and sound as great for those of us in person as those of us joining virtually, so thank you. Today's event will have 3 parts. It will be launched by Dr. Sophie Lewis's lecture, which will last about 50 minutes. University of Nebraska's Dr. Jean Amora will then respond and share her insights for about 10 minutes. The last 20 minutes are reserved, for your questions, whether here or online. So for those of you joining remotely, get those fingers clicking and type in your questions. We'll be monitoring the chat and we'll relay those in person. For those of us also joining in person, please chat in your location where you're joining us from. It's always fun to see the spread of our attendees now that we're in kind of a virtual event age. Before I begin, I want to pass this off to Sylvie 14, the exhibition's curator and the lecture series convener. We'll say a few words and introduce tonight's speakers. So thank you so much, Sylvie.
Thanks so much. Today, I guess I just want to thank BMS, first of all, for their support for both the exhibition and the related.
This was coordinated with the University of Nebraska. It was held at the BMS Center in Omaha.
Here tonight. These 2 projects are.
Do these people not know how to use microphones? That's not how you use a microphone.
Intellectually
speak into the microphone.
And rigorous and logistically demanding. So that's a lot. They celebrate curiosity, risk-taking, experimentation on many, many levels. They're also built on myriad artistic conversations and creative collaborations. And again, I want to echo Jared in thanking UNO's Medical Humanities, with whom this series was both developed and is being delivered. So it's been a long collaboration that's taken many forms.
Hang on. Mountain Goddess says, I see a major connection with queer folks in this ideology. Mountain Goddess, these are the people who push queer Marxism. They're the same people. So yeah, it's not just that there's a connection between them. These are the same people. These are the queer Marxists. Sophie is a queer Marxist.
Over many months. By joining forces, we can bring, international thought leaders to Omaha while shining a light on the exemplary work of Nebraska scholars and researchers and facilitating discourse.
That
and
sounds
exchange
good,
that might not
Jackie.
happen otherwise. Today, I'm most thankful to Dr. Lewis for her enthusiastic response to my invitation, for her interest in the exhibition and lecture series, her desire to use this opportunity to develop a new lecture, and her trust in bringing these fresh ideas into the world with us. Thank you so much. Finally, I'd like to thank Dr. Gina Mora for her willingness to step outside usual professional arena and into the art world. It's a big jump. Thank you for doing that with us, to share your knowledge, your experience, your passion with us by serving as a respondent. So I really look forward to lively conversation after the talk. Dr. Sophie Lewis is a visiting scholar at the Alice Paul Center for Research on Gender, Sexuality, and Women at the University of Pennsylvania, and a member of the teaching faculty of the Philadelphia branch of the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research. She's the author of Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against the Family, which was published by Verso in 2019.
Verso is a socialist book publisher.
Everyone has to read it. Which Donna Haraway has hailed as the seriously radical cry for full gestational justice that I long for. Her non-academic writing appears frequently in numerous venues, including the New York Times, The Nation,
Hang on.
eFlux, the New England.
Mio, I will make you a deal. Even though you continued to just complain about how fat I was on your stream yesterday, I will make you a deal. If you can sit through this episode of Socialism Saturday and not be disruptive and ask good questions. Actually, this is like advanced socialism, Mio. I know you think you understand this, and maybe you do. But if you can sit through this episode of Socialism Saturday and ask good questions and participate, then I will unblock you on Twitter. But if you can't do it, I don't want to hear any bitching and complaining. And if you disrupt my chat during this episode, then I'm going to block you here too.
Corey Jacobin and her portrayal. Keep an eye out for Sophie's forthcoming pamphlet on family abolition, which will be called Beyond the Family, The Case for Abolition, and will be released by Verso this year in 2022. Dr. Gina Moore is professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Nebraska and director of Nebraska Medicine's Early Pregnancy Assessment Clinic and the Gender Care Clinic. She received her medical degree from the University of Nebraska, completed OBGYN residency at the University of Michigan, and earned a master's degree in reproductive and sexual health research from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So she's exceptionally
and she's still wearing a mask.
Conversation. She's worked with hundreds of gender diverse patients of all ages through their transition. She also has a clinical focus on family planning, early pregnancy loss, and complex contraception, with additional attention to advancing medical education in these topics. So, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello. Thank you so much, Sylvie, and thank you, Jared, and thank you, Jean, and thank you, Bemis, and thank you for bringing me sort of out of my hermetic condition into a real life context. I'm so excited to be in Omaha, truly. So yeah, I might just briefly clarify that we've changed the name of our center to Research in Feminist, Queer and Transgender Studies. The website still says both. In any case, thank you for introducing me so generously. I'm just going to launch in, and as Sylvie said, it's kind of new stuff, and I was promised a kind of safe space, which I can feel already is the case. The phrase "we are here because you were there" is an old commonplace of immigrant-led anti-imperialist politics. It's a basic analysis of the reason why former subjects of empire might be resident in an inhospitable metropole. To paraphrase, we live among you now because before you came and colonized us. But why would such an explanation be necessary? Because, of course, the speakers are finding themselves unwelcome, interpolated by the you of the slogan into a them rather than an us. The slogan addresses the autochthonous authority that views the speakers as aliens, as uninvited guests, whose presence needs to be accounted for according to the rules of the dominant culture, rather than greeted as in other societies' ancient traditions, including ancient Greece with xenia and all of this, or treated to the special hospitality due to the stranger.
Sophie is Austrian, I believe. Or she grew there's some connection with Austria, but like Sophie's accent isn't real. Like Sophie lives in Philadelphia. I don't think no, anyway, Sophie's accent is not real. It's fake. A lot of socialists use fake British accents. I do believe Sophie did study at Oxford, but Sophie lives in Philadelphia.
If I'm going to permit myself to editorialize very briefly, when editors pre-COVID didn't really have a lot of time for my wild-eyed family abolitionist ravings, a couple of weeks of lockdown really changed their mind on that. And it was,
isn't that
it was
funny?
proposed that I might do some kind of op-ed on the possibilities COVID affords for quote unquote treating everyone like family. And I suggested that perhaps it's a good opportunity to learn to treat everyone as a stranger. And I guess
so what Sophie just said is that Sophie had been publishing this Abolish the Family stuff for a while, which is true, and no one was really paying attention to it. And then as soon as COVID happened and people were locked away with their families, all of a sudden people started asking Sophie for like more information on abolishing the biological nuclear family. You're going to hear terms like collectivization of care. That refers to abolishing the nuclear family, because the reason that they associate it with care is they say that the family that you're born into dictates the type of care that you have access to include medical care, to include psychological care, stuff like that. And so if you're born into a rich family, you have more access to care than if you're born into a poor family, and that disparity in access creates inequities that if we just abolished capitalism, that those inequities would go away. And the whole idea of communizing care is to make all resources available to everyone in the public. That's what universal health care is. And so that's what they're going for. And they think that they will be able to achieve that as long as we abolish capitalism, which they define as private property ownership.
The sort of sensibility, informed by that utopian inversion in this talk as well. So to explain why one is here becomes necessary when hospitality is withheld, when one is faced with xenophobic sentiments, such as go home, go back to where you come from, and so on. Listen, one ends up protesting in self-justification. Don't be surprised, tolerate us. Our lives in this location are actually caused by something you did. The implication being that, were that not the case, we might not be here at all. Perhaps even that we definitely wouldn't be here in this trumped up shithole had we had more choice in the matter. Or to pursue that vein even further, perhaps we are here in the same way that you were there. In other words, we are here to extract and subjugate, which is the very real fantasy of Islamophobic xenophobes throughout Europe who talk about colonization and invasion and Sharia law. Our immigration to the so-called core from the so-called periphery, this slogan perhaps implies, could be a kind of counter-colonization, a karmic cycle of history at least, or perhaps a form of vengeance. The phrase "we are here because you were there," at minimum, rings out as a reminder that Europe was built by the rest of the world, that you are still here, Western man, simply because we were. So as I'm hopefully making clear, and perhaps belaboring the point a little too long, and as Amber Doe's artwork by the same name evokes, it is a deceptively complex slogan. On one level, it appears to be ceding to the terms of a neo-colonial order, almost pleading not to be held responsible for the trespass that is actually history's fault.
Pop quiz for the chat. What does colonization mean? When Sophie's referring to colonization and decolonization, which is what she's referring to when she's saying colonial, what does colonization mean? Bot says it means capitalism taking over. Colonization is capitalism. How is it capitalism? It's not maintaining capitalism. Colonization isn't about maintaining capitalism. When capitalism is created, when the impressive force of capitalism is imposed on a civilization. Tayton says, "You are here because we were there" is a reference to capitalism taking resources from other countries and using the labor from those countries. Yeah, I think that sounds about right, doesn't it? Colonization is oppression by capitalism. And guys, remember, capitalism means private property ownership. Imperialism, which means capitalism. Call it capital. Well, guys, can we? Okay, we're graduating this year. We're in season 3 of Socialism Saturday. I don't want to see any of these one-word capitalism answers anymore. Come on, guys. Don't be lazy. These things all have different nuances. Colonization means introducing capitalism. Injecting capitalism ideology into a society, putting structures in place supporting capitalism. When capitalists took over the land and property from indigenous people. Colonization is capitalism being exported in other places, imposing capitalism on others. Great job, guys. Well done.
And on another level, in its rather conspicuous explanatory insufficiency vis-a-vis a question.
Great definition, Gloria.
Sense, it casts doubt on the validity of its own premise. So it thus points beyond itself, shaming the subject of xenophobia it appears to want to appease. So why would you want to question anyone's freedom to be here simply because they want to be, or indeed, to be here for no reason at all? Why do you feel entitled to an account of why someone is in your home? Indeed, given the lethal character of the colonial enterprise throughout the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, isn't it more apt to say, we are here despite the fact that you were there, where I am from? Let's get back to basics for a second. Where do people come from? I find it kind of hilarious to be posing this question in a scholarly and artistic setting, as opposed to an intimate conversation explaining the birds and the bees to a very young person. But sometimes the most basic things are precisely what we need to re-narrativize. So, listen, children.
Re-narrativize.
People come from the body.
Did you just hear that word? Do I have the captions on? No, I don't. Re-narrativize. Let's go back and listen to that again. Sophie is explaining how we need to use basic language and basic stories to re-narrativize, to change the story. This is like the victors will be the ones who write history. Yeah, it's kind of like she's saying re-narrativize, meaning rewrite history. Isn't that interesting?
Sometimes the most basic things are precisely what we need to re-narrativize. So,
Queer history.
listen, children. People come from the bodies of other people. People whose molecules are basically the same molecules as those of our fetal selves. Via the protection against full-blown invasion afforded to her by the hemicorial placenta, pictured here, isn't it intense? It's a really brutal apparatus. It really locks everything inside your anatomy down. Via the protection afforded by this apparatus, the uterus haver works metabolically in order to make more human flesh. She builds fetal eyeballs, fetal bone tissue, and so on. And just to dwell on this for a moment, the molecules are the same molecules as the uterus haver's molecules. Where else would they have appeared from? Gestator and gestatee are always.
Does anyone want to give another term for uterus haver? What does Sophie mean when she says uterus haver? Yeah, Sophie's kind of talking about like they're making like the uterus haver is making more human flesh, kind of like a factory. Yep, Sophie could be talking about a vagina owner. She could be, or a birthing person. Yep, she could be. How about a woman? How about a mother? Sophie's talking about mothers. She's talking about literally a pregnant woman.
Genetically completely different, yet at the same time made of the same blood and guts. That's a really interesting contradiction. In other words, if the bodies are not one, they certainly are not two. Or perhaps if the body isn't quite two, it also isn't one. Chikako Takeshita has proposed a noun for grasping this situation: the mother fetus. Takeshita offers an alternative ontology of the pregnant body, one which collapses the material distinction between the maternal and the fetal and insists that we must learn to think the mother fetus holobiont as a boundary-breaching cyborg figure engaged in symbiotic, right, reciprocal, and symbiogenetic becoming with co-production. A lot of long academic words.
The mother fetus is the being that comprises both the mother and the fetus, and they are a cyborg of some sort. I'm used to Sophie speaking in crazy language. I didn't quite understand what the hell she said, though. Hang on, let's just go back and grasp this mother fetus thing again.
It also isn't one. Chikako Takeshita has proposed a noun for grasping this situation: the mother fetus. Takeshita offers an alternative ontology of the pregnant body, one which collapses the material distinction between the maternal and the fetal and insists that we must learn to think the mother fetus holobiont as a boundary-breaching cyborg figure engaged in symbiotic, right, reciprocal, and symbiogenetic becoming with co-production. A lot of long academic words.
That just seems really unnecessary,
but hopefully
Sophie.
I'm breaking them down for you and making them a bit less scary. Takeshita's intervention is salutary because when it comes to moving beyond the discursive gridlock whereby feminists have sought decade on decade to fight a more than human liberation struggle on humanist terrain, I'll take any kind of tool or suggestion. I kind of like mother fetus. So perhaps you've already heard this 1,000 times. It's certainly a favorite feminist talking point in some areas of academia about the etymology of the word individual. The etymology excludes the female, defined according to reproductive capacity by its very definition, because the core concept in the word is indivisibility, and it was explicitly intended to exclude uterus bearing, i.e. potentially multiple and thus divisible.
Oh shit. Sophie is saying the word individual, which remember, socialists hate individualism because they see everything as part of a collective. So socialists don't believe in individualism. Sophie is saying that the word individual is bad because it was never designed to include women, because women by their very nature, or the uterus havers by their very nature, are designed to be more than the individual. She's saying that women are inherently a part of the collective. She is. Holy shit, Sophie, I swear to God.
So perhaps you've already heard this 1,000 times. It's certainly a favorite feminist talking point in some areas of academia about the etymology of the word individual. The etymology excludes the female, defined according to reproductive capacity by its...
The etymology of the word individual excludes the female, defined by their reproductive capacity. So it's not even just that, it's not that pregnant women are not individuals. Sophie is saying it excludes the female because the female has the ability to create another human being. So whether or not that female is pregnant, they are still not included under the word individual, which means that females in socialist are inherently a part of the collective. It's kind of like how they believe that all black people really should be socialists. They believe all women should be socialists too, because we are inherently the oppressed sex, I guess, under capitalism.
Very definition. Because the core concept in the word is indivisibility, and it was explicitly intended to exclude uterus bearing, i.e., potentially multiple and thus divisible anatomy from its purview. So that means the individual who gets to make claims like my body, my choice is by definition not a pregnant person, or the pregnant person is by definition not an individual. When Black and white and indigenous feminists the world over started saying my body, my choice, be it in reference to forced sterilization or access to abortion or the right to gender-affirming healthcare or freedom of sexuality, they were strategically invoking the liberal humanist premise of property in the body. And to some extent, it worked. Although reactionary and anti-feminist deployments of the same biopolitical claim, my body, my choice, towards deeply anti-social ends have always been co-present.
Anti-social ends.
One standard feminist response to the eye-opening anti-gestational etymology of the whole concept of individualism is to simply refute, right? Nonsense. Of course she's an individual. Like, of course. And I like, don't contest that exactly. Like the vast majority of feminists, I have tended to agree with this as a strategic move, or at least a tactical one, in the sense that individualist body sovereignty principles and, as I mentioned, property in the body discourses are what reproductive rights, justice, and freedom activists have had available to them, or what we have had available to us. What we have had so far in capitalist societies. And
Ding.
for the purposes of making that case,
capitalism,
that no one should be pregnant against their will, not even for the smallest amount of time, this kind of property in the body discourse can serve us. According to the standard feminist pro-choice framing, the divisible person must be empowered at all costs to become indivisible again.
Look at that sign.
Right? That's to say, individual again, if she wishes.
Hang on, I need to just take a picture of this. Hang on. What the fuck, Sophie? Make abortion great again?
After all, some of the components of the mother fetus are much more equal than others. One of them is a person, whereas the other is a proto-person. Both are attached, albeit asymmetrically, to this aggressively extractive and protective apparatus that mediates between.
She just called a fetus a proto-person. Did everyone hear that? I know we were all distracted by the sign.
After all, some of the components of the mother fetus are much more equal than others. One of them is a person, whereas the other is a proto-person.
Oh my God, Sophie, I swear to God, this is why we watch Sophie. This is why we love Sophie. So Sophie has argued that we need to refer to a uterus haver as the mother fetus, because the uterus haver who is pregnant is not an individual. They are a cyborg-like being that is a different type of like human, because it is two people in one, and we are now referring to that as the mother fetus. But Sophie literally just said some components of the mother fetus are more equal than others, in that the uterus haver that's pregnant is an individual, whereas the child that they are pregnant with is a proto-person. Sophie is literally invoking Animal Farm in the making of this analogy. Let's listen again.
Even for the smallest amount of time, this kind of property in the body discourse can serve us. According to the standard feminist pro-choice framing, the divisible person must be empowered at all costs to become indivisible again, right? That's to say, individual again, if she wishes. After all, some of the components of the mother fetus are much more equal than others. One of them is a person, whereas the other is a proto-person.
Mm-hmm.
Both are attached, albeit asymmetrically, to this aggressively extractive and protective apparatus that mediates between, but which is geared to preserve the life of the fetus over the life of the gestator when push comes to shove. Any reason and no reason at all are thus good enough reason to pull the plug, especially given how threatening the apparatus is to the adult's health and even her life, right? 300,000 people a year die of during pregnancy. Just, yeah, blows my mind. No doubt about it, ethically, what the pregnant person wants goes. So I actually agree with the fascist proponents of forced gestation that ethical consideration towards fetuses.
Forced gestation. Sophie is referring to like anti-abortion legislation as forced gestation.
Once goes. So I actually agree with the fascist proponents of forced gestation that ethical consideration towards fetuses should be on our list of things to tend to at some point. I want to get to a place where giving fetuses ethical consideration has become viable, right? But at least until the day when gestating is a lot less dangerously invasive of a process for a body to undertake, and or until the day that it can be partially, perhaps, automated or handed off to a third party for.
Holy shit, Sophie. Sophie just said that she really wants to give fetuses like ethical consideration, but right now, childbirth is just way too dangerous to the uterus havers or the pregnant people to give fetuses ethical consideration. And so we have to put the fetuses, and I'm pro-choice, by the way. I'm pro-choice. I'm not this pro-choice though. Like Sophie is saying that we have to put the ethical needs of the fetuses on the back burner because childbirth is just way too dangerous of a process for the pregnant people to go to. And we cannot consider the ethical needs of the fetuses until we have an automated or third-party way of producing those fetuses, which is what? What is the automated or handing off to a third-party way of producing the fetuses in a way that we can give them ethical consideration? What is Sophie talking about? She's talking about fucking baby pods. She's talking about baby pods. Surrogacy, baby pods, the birthing pods, surrogacy. Yep. Let's listen again. This is just thank you, Sophie. Thank you for this gift. This is great.
Goes. So I actually agree with the fascist proponents of forced gestation that ethical consideration towards fetuses should be on our list of things to tend to at some point. I want to get to a place where giving fetuses ethical consideration has become viable, right? But at least until the day when gestating is a lot less dangerously invasive of a process for a body to undertake, and or until the day that it can be partially, perhaps, automated or handed off to a third party for a spell, what a fetus wants is really completely immaterial. As I say, this is my position politically. Abortions are a public good, not a necessary evil. However, I'm curious, besides sovereign individualism, are there other ways of getting to that conclusion? Other response strategies may be worth entertaining in the face of the assertion.
Sophie never disappoints us. Amelia, thank you for the super chat. I want an AI simulation of every single thing this woman wants to implement. I want to see in real time, like, bruh. Yeah, Sophie's a little, like, we love Sophie because, the thing about Sophie is I really do think that Sophie actually does care about people, and I really do think that Sophie actually wants the best for people. I just think Sophie's ideas of how to get there are a little bit insane. But I do think she actually is, unlike some socialists, I do actually think Sophie is acting in good faith. she's nutty, man.
That a pregnant person is not an individual. What if, experimentally, when the fascist proponents of forced gestation say, is it really just your body? We allowed it. What if experimentally we said, you're completely right. A body does not have two hands.
She's trying to figure out a different way to argue against anti-abortion activists. She's trying to figure out a different talking point that they can use to advance reproductive justice.
Two heads, 4 hands, 4 legs, 2 beating hearts, and 2 different sets of DNA. A body has so many more things than that. What if we contemplated saying, okay, so be it. The pregnant person is not an individual. And we asked ourselves instead, so what is she then? And nota bene, perhaps she is not a she at all. A holobiont, a cyborg, is the answer again for Takashita, or say Astrida Neymanis, author of Bodies of Water, or Donna Haraway. How can we think a collective feminist subject in reference to such a being? A majority of Marxists, much to my chagrin, have not always been willing to try. But remember, the putatively non-pregnant among us really shouldn't be at all confident that we aren't also pretty divisible, deconstructible, for instance, into myriad symbiotic populations of beings with distinct DNA, bacterial cultures, microorganisms, and so on. Microchimerism, for example, is the scientific term for the cross-colonization that takes place in, literal pregnancy, the production process whence we all originate, whereupon pieces of the DNA of the fetus are left behind and sort of float around the adult's body for the rest of their life, and vice versa, pieces of the gestator's DNA.
Wait, Lalo is streaming my show. Lalo, I'm very sorry, bro. You're not going to be able to follow this. This is not, I promise you, if you couldn't deal with my stream the other night because I saw your reaction to it, you aren't going to be able to follow this. I'm very sorry. Also, bro, I only know your name. I don't really know that much about you. I don't have any special interest in you. Yeah, I watched your stream. I did. But, I mean, you guys can hang out and try to understand socialism if you want. I just don't think it's actually going to work. But, I don't know. Give it a try. I'll catch up with what you did later, maybe, if I feel like it. Sophie liked your post. What did you write? Yeah, I'm just saying, bro, that I watched your stream and I know that you were very annoyed at my dead air and my lack of energy and all that stuff and you know, the fat woman, blah 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 blah. But you're not going to be able to understand this and you're not going to be able to follow this and I don't think your audience is going to be able to either. So no fucking with my shit, bro. I don't allow that. This is actually serious. This is not just fucking around on the internet.
Sort of then co-comprise the born one in perpetuity. Basically, babies, once they've emerged from someone's abdomen, are at once drastically helpless, unfinished, and new, and kind of old, and already damaged, and riddled with the fumes of history. So, that's in brief where people come from, and how. One word for the creative process involved is anthrogenesis.
Joa, if you fucking subpoena me, I'm gonna be really fucking pissed. Don't fucking come in my stream and threaten to subpoena me. You have all the video you need, bro.
The making of the human. And as I've hopefully evoked, when one starts to track the trails of anthrogenesis across the earth, it becomes hard to limit its purview to persons presenting with literal placentas. As you may already know, I've long been interested in the agonism of anthrogenesis. I've written again and again about this sort of too infrequently discussed ripping and tearing and fighting that goes along with the biology of hospitality, of generosity, of love that happens during placentation and parturition in our species. And I'm, pretty obsessed, I think, still today. I'm glad that Sylvie invited me to think again, to think about new things in connection with it, because I think there's heuristically generative boundary trouble that tells us something about bodily xenohospitality, right? Which is to say, hospitality toward the alien. To an extent, as I wrote in the final chapter of Full Surrogacy Now, bodies are always leaky, parasited, and non-unitary. It can sound sort of too easy to say that, really. And it can become a romantic reflection, as though it's pleasant or pretty. The vital and varied flora of bacteria that swirl through and between every body, not just gestating ones, makes a mockery of bodily autonomy, even outside of pandemics.
Yes,
Which
she
is
does,
not, of course, to say that bodily autonomy isn't paradoxically at the same time a really important principle. Again, dialectics. In the accounts of earthly life given by biologists such as Lynn Margulis, we are all revealed to be disconcertingly pregnant. That is, sort of multiply pregnant with myriad beings, some of whom are even simultaneously gestating us back.
What? We're all simultaneously pregnant with multiple human beings?
Again, dialectics. In the accounts of earthly life given by biologists such as Lynn Margulis, we are all revealed to be disconcertingly pregnant. That is, sort of multiply pregnant with myriad beings, some of whom are even simultaneously gestating us back.
You know what? This is a good point, Jackie. This is a good point. This is like a new definition of pregnancy. Would it really surprise anyone if they tried to redefine the term pregnancy? I don't think Sophie's going to have much like success with this particular tactic, but like, does it surprise anyone that they're trying to redefine pregnancy?
Which is to say, providing some crucial developmental functions on our behalf. But speaking of symbiogenesis, having discovered the work of Patricia Piccinini via my teen idol Donna Haraway's essay on it in 2011, that's an essay called Speculative Fabulations for Technoculture's Generations. I've looked back to these surrogates, helpers, carriers, and gestators in Piccinini's oeuvre again and again as haptic meditations on xeno-hospitality and xeno-solidarity, solidarity and hospitality vis-a-vis the alien. They're
What
not,
the
I
fuck?
think, utopian visions, or if they
Is Sophie on drugs? Like, seriously, like, has Sophie just, like, has she smoked way too much weed and now, like, everyone is just dating a fucking alien? I'm so lost about where she's going with this. I don't know. Let's just listen. If anyone else is deeply confused, I am deeply confused as well. It seems like Sophie has, like, gone into the woods and has, where is it? Oh god, someone just said she was tripping earlier. I couldn't find it. Hang on it. Yeah, it seems like Sophie has, like, gone into the woods and done acid. And what's come out of that is we are all perpetually just dating alien children. No, Sophie absolutely has a bad relationship with her father. She wrote about it in her book. She wrote about it in the introduction to her first book. Yeah, I'm kind of like, am I on drugs right now? Are all of us on drugs right now? Let's just see where this goes.
are their sort of critical utopias. For one thing, the hyperreal human beings in Piccinini's Surrogate series are typically white, a whiteness that the equally hyperreal pink skin of the cyborg creatures highlights rather uncannily. The humans' vulnerabilities are being tended to by these stoical, albeit sometimes faintly threatening, pseudo-white non-human companions in what appears like a one-way flow. The mutants who are holding and nourishing the human seems unthanked, unacknowledged, even unseen. Perhaps in Piccinini's settler colonial Australian context, the labors of species contaminating care and kinship practices that are, represented here, benefiting white people are
Capitalist.
undeserved.
That means capitalist.
Right? Certainly unreciprocated. But I also don't think Piccinini is saying anything as simple as, that's not okay. After all, care is never symmetrical, nor need it necessarily strive to be. However, as I read it, there is an incitement here to cultivate class consciousness, a sadly outmoded phrase, which perhaps can be recoded as transnationalist, multi-species, proletarian responsibility. Yes.
What the fuck? Transnationalist, multi-species, proletarian response. I don't get any of this.
Haraway spells it that way, response-ability, i.e. the ability to respond ongoingly to the far-flung intimacies of distributed reproduction. Ways must be found ongoingly to rub our reluctant faces in the continuities between the biomes and flesh worlds that centuries of capitalist ecology have sapped, disabled, and rendered toxic, and the bodies.
It's entirely possible that Sophie is trolling everyone at this point, which, you know what, like, if Sophie is actually trolling everyone with this talk, then can we all just give Sophie, like, a round of applause? Like, well done. Like, Sophie, this is next fucking level, man. Tayton says she's making a collective argument, pregnancy and collective nurturing. I'm not following what you mean by that, Tayton. You got to give me more detail than just to say that, because I don't know what argument she's making at the moment. Yeah, Sophie is MK Ultraing us right now, is what's happening. They're not Malthusians though, Gloria. Sophie is not a Malthusian at all. Sophie doesn't like the Malthusians.
That settlers especially like to think of as our own neatly bounded family trees. Like Donna Haraway's socialist 1985 cyborg, my title, Full Surrogacy Now, was both descriptive and prescriptive. It's both utopian and dystopian. Descriptively, it refers to a reality that is already here, which is that we are all very much the makers of one another. Or, in the other case, we are all non-innocent cyborgs, whether we like it or not. And at the same time, again, like the cyborg, it is a manifesto, a prescription that we have to collectively recognize that we are the makers of one another and that we are each other's harvest and learn to act like it. The practical collective skills to be cultivated towards that end as a matter of urgency could be called, in my other proposed coinage, amniotechnics. Amniotechnics is the art of holding and caring even while being ripped into, at the same time as being held. It is protecting water and protecting people from water, recognizing that we are made not so much underwater as in water, being water ourselves, so water in water. Our wateriness is our surrogacy. It's the bed of our body's overlap. And it is, not necessarily, but possibly, a source of radical kinship. The art of caring for water in full recognition of its death-dealing inhumanity and its unromantic necessariness to life. Full recognition that it is a kind of frenemy within is one aspect of the art of living on a damaged planet, in my opinion, to recall Anna Tsing's phrase. In After Fukushima, Jean-Luc Nancy writes about the catastrophe of meaning to which humanity collectively is being exposed in the wake of continued, combined and uneven ecocide. Let us remain exposed, he suggests provocatively, and let us think about what is happening to us, ce qui nous arrive. Let us think that it is we who are arriving or are leaving. If the Anthropocene calls us.
Yeah, Bot just said it says capitalism. Let's see what this actually says. Hang on, let me turn off the closed captions. Let us remain exposed and let us think about what is happening to us. Let us think that it is we who are arriving or are leaving. If the Anthropocene calls us to imagine humanity written into the rock of the earth itself, capitalism is the instrument of this brutal inscription, for it is not the product of humanity that will come to be stratified, but the externalities of Monsanto and DuPont. I obviously need to drink more for this stream. Okay, guys, I have to go. I have to go to the little socialist room, so I will be right back. I'm gonna put this on play. Everyone, take good notes. And let me know if there's anything I need to know when I come back. Okay.
To imagine humanity written into the rock of the earth itself. Capitalism is the instrument of this brutal inscription. For it is not the products of humanity that will come to be stratified, but the externalities of Monsanto and DuPont. Okay, so first off, it is we who are arriving or leaving seems to me to be a promising modification of the terms of the encounter with Xenos, the stranger, which we looked at in the beginning, whereby the firmly rooted citizen rejects the ancient imperative of Xenia and considers herself just not implicated, not a part of the coming and going of immigrants who are here, because she, in a sense, was there. In the ecocidal moment in which so much of Earth is becoming uninhabitable, in other words, perhaps our leaving and arriving will always and henceforward be mutual, or it will not be. All borders of nation states closed to migrants must self-evidently be opened, given the uneven yet radically combined character of climate catastrophe. But there are two other things in Nancy's reflection here that jump out at me. The phrase products of humanity and the word stratified. Stratified reproduction is a phrase advanced by the anthropologist Shelley Collen, author of The Global Politics of Reproduction, in order to capture what baby making essentially is in a class society. In essence, it is structured like a layer cake made up of discrete strata, with all the cream reserved for the mothers, babes, and infants of the upper crust. In Jean-Luc Nancy's usage here, of course, stratification is referring to the buildup of rock and fossil formations. He is perhaps suggesting.
Okay, people are saying I have to rewind because Sophie was talking about open borders. Well, yeah, I mean, most socialists are open borders. Like, socialists don't believe that countries should exist, so I'm not convinced that, like, she talked about open borders for climate change. All right, fucking hell, I'll rewind. Jesus Christ. All borders of nations, okay. World becoming uninhabitable, blah, 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 blah. All right, here we go.
Okay, so first off, it is we who are arriving or leaving seems to me to be a promising modification of the terms of the encounter with Xenos, the stranger, which we looked at in the beginning, whereby the firmly rooted citizen rejects the ancient imperative of Xenia and considers herself just not implicated, not a part of the coming and going of immigrants who are here, because she, in a sense, was there. In the ecocidal moment in which so much of Earth is becoming uninhabitable, in other words, perhaps our leaving and arriving will always and henceforward be mutual, or it will not be. All borders of nation states closed to migrants must self-evidently be opened, given the uneven yet radically combined character of climate catastrophe. But there are two other things in Nancy's reflection here that jump out at me. The phrase products of humanity and the word stratified. Stratified reproduction is a phrase advanced by the anthropologist Shelley Colin, author of The Global Politics of Reproduction, in order to capture what baby making essentially is in a class society. In essence, it is structured like a layer cake made up of discrete strata, with all the cream reserved for the mothers, babes, and infants of the upper crust. In Jean-Luc Nancy's usage here, of course, stratification is referring to the buildup of rock and fossil formations. He is perhaps suggesting will henceforward be interspersed with substances like the plastiglomerate rock that the queer science scholar Heather Davis thinks with her book Plastic Matter.
Queer science scholar.
A millefeuille layering of chemical history, which Nancy is saying is being written not by humans, but by capital. And I totally get why Nancy wants to say that we are living in the Capitalocene, not the Anthropocene. For instance, because large swathes of indigenous humanity have had little role in geoengineering planet Earth beyond human habitability. I'm not really defending the Anthropocene, to be clear, but I can't accept that the products of humanity can be clearly separated from the externalities of the vast multinational chemical, technoscience, and fossil fuel conglomerates. I understand the logic behind separating out that which humans seek to make and that which capital wreaks and makes us make.
Oh!
But separating...
Look at this. Look at this. This is like the production line of like capitalism. Capitalism also depends on domestic labor. Well, okay, so for people who are confused about why socialists believe the nuclear family upholds capitalism, it's because the nuclear family is quite literally the production unit for the future generation of oppressed workers under capitalism. Does everyone understand that? And I'm asking because there are some new people here tonight. Does everyone understand why socialists believe that the nuclear family upholds capitalism, and that's why they need to abolish the nuclear family to get rid of capitalism? Because it is very literally the incubator for the future generation of oppressed proletarian workers. Thank you, bot. Yes, that's what social reproduction theory is. Capitalism needs workers, workers are people, and it's the family that produces new workers. Yes. Well, I know I've explained this before, but not everyone is here for every stream, and so I need to say the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, because we need to make sure everyone understands it, not just the people who have been here before.
These two things is nevertheless impossible. When the labor power we sell congeals into commodities, it leaves its trace on the effluents in the tailing ponds, leaching into the groundwater, and then ultimately for Nancy, the fossil record of the planet. And that's just directly market-mediated labor. As a feminist influenced both by Haraway's cyborgicity thesis and by the social factory thesis of the unorthodox autonomia Marxists and wages against housework militants of Italy in the early 70s, I want to understand the materiality of social reproduction to be part of those same
Social
circuits
reproduction.
of valorization as is wage commodity production. The phrase social reproduction, by the way, basically means the same thing as anthrogenesis.
Tayton, this is great. The nuclear family is the uterus of capitalism. That's great. That's great. Angel Eyes, thank you for gifting 5 memberships to the channel. I do appreciate that. Congratulations who was everyone who was gifted with a membership. We got Patty, we got, well, Sarah with an H, such as it is, I suppose. Tinge, Sassy Me, Mountain Goddess was gifted with a membership. Sarah with an H, I thought you weren't coming back. That's interesting because you clearly had a hissy fit in my comments the other day and told me you weren't coming back. And so here you are, watching in secret and gifted with a membership to my channel. So it seems like you came back. You might as well show yourself because we know you're here now. Yet Sophie thinks socialism will be a utopia. I would take, well, yes, all socialists believe that people will be much better off under socialism than under capitalism. Yes, she does.
In the specific sense of making and remaking human life in the service of the perpetuation of markets. A quick note in case of lack of familiarity about this group, Wages for Housework. Wages for Housework, also known as Wages Against Housework, was a utopianist platform that issued directional demands for money and time, with a view to one day doing away entirely with both wages and housework. And these women advanced, among other things, that, quote, every miscarriage is a workplace accident, because every pregnancy—
Hang on. We don't do this here. We don't do this here. This is not about debunking them. This is about understanding them. Sophie could read as much Z Van Fleet as you want her to read, and that's not going to change anything.
Paid or unpaid is a job. And they grappled with the fact that unpaid childbearing and housework is productive for capitalism. The insidiousness of the problem is precisely that the family, for example, is simultaneously workplace and haven. We have to try to be dialectical about it. Social reproduction activities, such as caring, are often a major, if not paramount, source of satisfaction in this world, even as they are simultaneously value-producing labors that are being hollowed out from under us and stolen from us by the hydra-headed system of endless accumulation, right? So this opposition Nancy is making between the products of humanity and the traces of Monsanto and DuPont, I think that's a wishful dichotomy, unfortunately. And I take that same exact insight, by the way, from the Cyborg Manifesto. Right, the cyborg is a non-innocent figure of collective liberation, Haraway told us. Careful, she kept saying, not to romanticize this. The cyborg is born as the cyborg enemy, and the death-dealing machine,
Rottweiler,
in a sense, is us. It's a really difficult thing to think with, at least for the time being, and certainly for the foreseeable. The death-dealing machine is partly working through us.
Hang on.
That's not to say—
So is Sophie arguing that climate change, which is caused by capitalism, is fundamentally poisoning the human body. So human beings are being poisoned because of capitalism. And then because we are poisoned by climate change, we are passing on those that poison when we uterus bearers have children, and thus capitalism. Yeah, she's saying thus pregnancy, because of climate change, pregnancy is basically a giant death machine. I think that's what she's saying.
We can't also work against it, but there's no purity in sight. The flesh of our loved ones is densely scribbled on by capitalist metabolism,
Capitalist
toxicants,
metabolism.
carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, plastics.
Capitalist
We must let
metabolism.
go of our normative attachments to the ideal of undamaged life. As CRIP theory and science and technology studies and
CRIP theory is, CRIP stands for cripple. It's a word they're trying to reclaim under disability studies. So it doesn't mean like a gang. It means CRIP as in crippled. Which you can, if you are a disabled person and you want to claim victim points under disability studies, you identify as CRIP.
Environmental humanities scholars like Heather Davis are increasingly teaching us humanity and humanities products are objectively not separate, if they ever were, from the processes of laying waste and destructive productivity that Nancy indexes there with those words, Monsanto, DuPont. Our adult and neonatal bodies alike are full of microplastics. Many types of plastic directly inhibit the human ability to reproduce procreatively, but on account of its own almost infinite longevity, Davis proposes plastic should perhaps in and of itself be understood as a non-filial human progeny, a kind of bastard child that will most certainly outlive us. How do we care for plastic offspring? And how do we care for the many poisoned mothers of humanity's products and capital's byproducts?
Capitalism's byproducts.
In 2014, I watched a talk.
Hang on. You guys need to cut this shit out. If all you're doing is thinking about ways to debunk her, you are not listening and understanding what she's saying. This is not about debunking her. This is not about saying Sophie doesn't really know anything about economics, or doesn't Sophie know that real socialism has been tried and it sucks, or Sophie should really read these people who've lived in socialism. Like, none of that matters. We don't do that here. You can do that in any other fucking conservative echo chamber. You cannot do it here, okay? It's distracting and it misses the point. Beth, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it. She is so hard for me to listen to. She sounds like she has ice in her veins to me. One may disagree, but I find her untenable. I'm here because I need to share this and I need to understand, difficult as that may be. I mean, Beth, what I would tell you, and again, I've said this before, I understand that this might be hard to understand. I really do believe that Sophie does care about people. I think that Sophie has like a good heart. Sophie is one of these people that has been indoctrinated into this ideology probably since she was a little kid. Sophia has been in academia literally her entire life. Her entire life has been spent in higher education. Well, once she got into higher education, like she never left higher education. Sophie only communicates with other socialists. This is the only world that she knows. And so I'm not going to vilify her because she's saying crazy things, because there are some socialists who I will say are evil. I genuinely actually believe, though, that Sophie does care about people and she wants what's best for people. I just think she has crazy ideas about how to get there that are not going to work in real life. So I wouldn't say that she has ice through her veins. But I understand why you feel that way too.
By the feminist neuroscience scholar Debelina Roy on YouTube. And it's a piece of research I mentioned briefly in Full Surrogacy Now, But as you can see, I almost never forgot it, and I remain fascinated. I am really grateful to Sylvie for sponsoring and offering me this opportunity in which to revisit that unforgettable talk and to begin a little thinking along with the analysis Debelina Roy offered. Okay, so entitled Germline Ruptures, Methyl Isocyanate Gas and the Transpositions of Life, Death and Matter in Bhopal, Roy's talk pointed to a uniquely poignant aspect of the ongoing fallout from what is commonly accepted as the world's worst industrial disaster. And it's an aspect that immediately suggested to me the phrase, what goes around comes around.
Sophie is one of the leading Abolish the Family scholars in the country. She has written 2 books on Abolish the Family. Almost every time there is an Abolish the Family lecture anywhere, Sophie is involved in it. Sophie has lectured at Ivy League schools around the country. Sophie currently works at the University of Pennsylvania. She's given lectures at the University of Pennsylvania. She's given lectures at Cornell, Brown. She's at the University of Omaha with this one. So she's very, very relevant. Sophie gave 2 presentations at the Socialism Conference. Sophie speaks for Red May all the time. We don't watch people who are not relevant in the socialist movement.
Because, as Sharmila Rudrappa has also shown, populations in India that were targeted for reproductive desistance via sterilization, Planned Parenthood education, and indeed environmentally racist chemical, architectural, and urban planning decisions, in a gruesome twist of history, all too often, those very same populations become those targeted.
Hang on. This is the point where I have to remind everyone that the radical revolutionary socialists are not the Malthusians. The radical revolutionary socialists do not care about depopulation. They do not talk about depopulation. No amounts of mentions or complainings about the WEF or George Soros or Klaus Schwab or any of that is going to change that. These are not the depopulation people. These have never been the depopulation people. These are the people that are afraid that conservatives are engaging in eugenics. And at some point, I will beat the entire idea out of my chat that these people are WEF Malthusians because they hate the WEF. These people do not talk about degrowth. They do not talk about depopulation. If James Lindsay has told you that they talk about degrowth and depopulation, James Lindsay is lying to you because James Lindsay has not been to their events. I have. And he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about if he's confusing these people with the Malthusians. Different people. They are entirely different people. I have now answered your question that they are entirely different people, and you're still hanging on to it because James Lindsay has lied to a metric fuck ton of people and convinced them of something that isn't true. These people do not talk about depopulation. They do not talk about degrowth. When these people care about something, they talk about it all the time. They don't talk about this. Does everyone understand? These are not the Malthusians. This is not the WEF. This is not Klaus Schwab. This is not George Soros. These are completely different groups that are separate from each other that don't even like each other. Excellent.
To have babies, right? And their reproductive capacities are harnessed for domestic purchase and also chiefly for export. So the medical tourism, including especially reproductive tourism industry, has been promoted intensively by the Indian government for outside investment. And while surrogacy itself is currently illegal in India, many of the other component parts of reproductive assistance, as it's called, which I always bracket in my mind with this kind of objection, as though any reproduction could be unassisted, are still very much in place, right? Those industries of medical outsourcing. So the possibility remains, despite the surrogacy being banned right now, that toxicant affected surro babies have returned a modicum of methyl isocyanate mediated flesh sort of back to America, where Union Carbide was founded.
Rottweiler, thank you for the super chat. Hang on. There it is. Degrowth for these people means relinquishing private property, not the same as the Malthusians people. None of these people even mention the WEF ever. That's right. That's exactly right. We have watched thousands of hours of this stuff over like the last couple of years. They never mention the WEF because they don't like them. Yes. These people these are the radical revolutionary socialists. The radical revolutionary Marxists think the WEF are capitalists.
A kind of loop of queer poetic justice. We are here because you were there. But before I go on, I do want to just refresh our collective memories about the Bhopal disaster. The tragedy in question, which occurred in early December 1984, consisted of a gargantuan explosion of methyl isocyanate, which is also known as carbaryl, and can be sort of shorthanded MIC, from the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Madhya Pradesh. And the plant manufactured Temic and Sevin, which were popular brands of carbamate pesticides of the type that began to be used in the 1950s and 60s Green Revolution in agriculture. These are organic compounds that kill insects by attacking their brains and nervous systems. According to best estimates, when a large quantity of tank cleaning water was accidentally poured into the container full of methyl isocyanate at the plant, the heat-generating chemical reaction that was triggered killed 20,000 human beings, either instantly or in the initial 2 to 3 months of the aftermath. But even that number fails to convey the fact that the tragedy is still, to this day, actively unfolding, with the uncleaned up pollution still meeting myriad forms of slow violence out to hundreds of thousands more people via groundwater and food production, but also via bodies themselves in the form of heritable nervous, respiratory, and reproductive toxicities. There are protests all the time. They haven't stopped. It's been almost 40 years. Union Carbide, by the way, was bought out by Dow Chemical 15 years later. Many lifelong activist survivors have called not only for Union Carbide and then Dow Chemical to compensate and clean up, but also for funding and for ongoing scientific research, reproductive monitoring, genetic screening of the victims and their families. No responsibility by either Union Carbide or Dow Chemical was ever forthcoming. Although I wonder if any of you caught this moment where the hoax activist group, the Yes Men, managed to convince the BBC that one of them was a legitimate spokesperson for Dow Chemical, and was actually filmed and then broadcast twice before the clip was taken down, speaking as Dow, apologizing for the tragedy and taking full responsibility and promising $50 billion in reparations, which I have to say is one of my favorite theatrical détournement moments of that genre, and it was a real coup for them. And some people attacked them, saying that they had raised false hope for the people in Bhopal who had sort of, been fighting for this, and for a couple of hours had thought that they were receiving, billions of dollars. But if you're interested in that angle, there's, I think, a very persuasive documentary that the two Yes Men did, following up, traveling amongst all the sort of reproductive justice clinics and survivor-led organizations in the area, where a lot of people just laugh at the idea that they had given them false hope and that they shouldn't have done it. There's some really moving quotes from people who say, we've been fighting for this for 30 years. you know, when you're in hell and you think you're in heaven for 2 hours, you just thank the people who put you in heaven, even if it was only for 2 hours. And Dow, in response to that, simply denied that the press release was legitimate, which you'd hope would have some kind of effect. Denying, that you're giving 50. In any case, I should move on.
Yes, Sophie, move on, please.
So survivors have called ongoingly for scientific research, reproductive monitoring, genetic screening of the victims and their families. As I say, 4 days after the tragedy, the company's chairman, Warren Anderson, was arrested under the order of the Indian government upon arriving in Madhya Pradesh. But after being held under house arrest for only a few hours, Anderson posted bail and quickly left the country, never returning to face trial. He gets burned in effigy a lot. Actually, no, I think this is him, and this is the current Dow CEO.
They're burning the capitalists in effigy because they destroyed their climate.
And Dow is a company that, I kid you not,
hang on.
has recently.
By the way, I don't actually want to excuse this behavior on the part of major industrial corporations. It's this type of shit that is causing the socialist backlash in the first place. And so I'm not actually saying that the people are wrong to burn them in effigy. If in real life the major international corporation fucked up their environment and got them all sick, that's not good, bro. That's not good. We don't condone that. We don't co-sign that. That's not why we like capitalism.
Been hailed as woke by virtue of having a gay CEO. Debelina Roy drew on a broad range of scientific evidence claiming that MIC and its metabolites have left their mark and continue to interact with the hormones, tissues, DNA, both somatic and gametic, and the reproductive activity of the Bhopali population. As is quasi-invariably the case within the logic of surplus life and environmental racism, the impact was class differentiated. This is horrible. Those who were able to escape the deadly fumes by car were found to have better survival rates and fewer long-term health repercussions. Those without vehicles who attempted to flee on foot breathed in the toxic air and suffered much more heavily. In a gruesome anti-reproductive futurity twist, the toxic gas, which was heavier than the surrounding air, settled close to the ground in the wake of the explosion, exposing small children to the very highest concentrations. Women who were pregnant at the time of the leak experienced miscarriages at 10 times higher than the normal population. A 2009 review of clinical and experimental findings, Roy explains, finds that there are all kinds of menstrual abnormalities, vaginal discharge, and premature menopause issues that have emerged as common symptoms among MIC-exposed women and their female offspring. Most interestingly, she's looking at these vertical transmissions and epigenetic impacts of MIC exposure via gestation on future generations. All in all, Roy proposes, MIC is transforming life in intergenerational time. But while there's no question about pursuing reparations from the firms and governments, both Indian and transnational, right, whose negligence made this massacre, given the role of carbamate pesticides like Sevin and Temic products in the Green Revolution, Roy suggests that we should actually understand what she's calling MIC-mediated reproduction as having begun long before the 1984 industrial catastrophe. So the catastrophe becomes something that makes something already happening more visible. You've probably heard by now that living human fetuses, conceptualized as genetically authored private property, are, one of the many commodities whose manufacture can be outsourced to the global south.
This is that great sentence from the beginning where Sophie says that living human fetuses are a commodity that under private that are a commodity under capitalism, which means they're a private property under capitalism, and the production of the living human fetuses, who some people might call babies, is being exported to the global south, which is going to include India because it's in the southern hemisphere. Yes, genetically authored private property equals babies. I do. I have a strong love for Sophie. I really do. My love for Sophie is true. It is pure. I love Sophieisms. Sophie is the best socialist on the planet. Let's just listen to that again.
You've probably heard by now that living human fetuses, conceptualized as genetically authored private property, are, one of the many commodities whose manufacture can be outsourced to the global south. Gestational workers typically belong to structurally adjusted proletarian geographies, and that includes Eastern Europe.
Proletarian geographies.
They stand fairly low on caste hierarchies throughout Southeast Asia, and they hail from populations often classified as surplus to capital's requirements. Contract pregnancy gigs are presented to them by recruiters as opportunities to exit the misery of their class, and also, very normatively, to buy a house to raise their own children in. They do not contribute eggs, only supposedly muscle, and their job in general is quite inadequately protected, both in family and labor law, locally and transnationally. The so-called intended parents, on their part, are typically from the middle and upper classes of the same country as the surrogate, or else the lower middle classes and up of overdeveloped nations, such as ours. After the industry-recommended cesarean section that produces their commissioned offspring, these parents rarely continue. They very rarely continue whatever nominal relationship they were conducting remotely with their carrier during the 8 months prior. The genetic blueprint of your desired fetuses, clients are insistently invited to imagine by the clinicians who are taking their money, is what counts, right? Pretty much exclusively in terms of the authorship of the babies. It's your data in that little chip, if you like, that counts. And it has been provided according to your own design prior to being transferred in embryo form into an in vivo environment that is essentially a holding place, not a craft workshop. Gestational labor, framed as passive and uncreative in this way, has been hireable now for a couple of decades in an ever-shifting constellation of national legislatures. And it's in particular, as you probably know, these places that where outsourcing gets concentrated for all kinds of other industries, and for a fraction of what it costs to hire a commercial American or say a Ukrainian surrogate. Speaking of which, Ukrainian surrogacy workplaces are very much in the news right this second. And the coverage has reminded me of the grisly realities revealed in the Nepal earthquake in 2015, during which catastrophe the Israeli government sent in airlift support, but exclusively for its own citizens on Nepali territory. And that category, Israeli citizens, included the fetuses owned by Israeli commissioning couples that had, perhaps only just exited the bodies of Nepali surrogates, or even still inside the bodies, but not the surrogates themselves. They were not airlifted. Or if they were airlifted, they were reportedly denied visas to Israel while they and their precious cargo were temporarily held in Israeli hospitals. As the socialist writer Belen Fernandez crisply remarked, this action demonstrated that fetuses that have been gestated in Nepal and are often the offspring of a non-Jewish mother and carried by a non-Jewish surrogate could claim a birthright to the self-appointed Jewish state, while Palestinians literally born on that land cannot. The contract pregnancy industry makes all kinds of amazing claims about how manufacturing new human beings works, which is why I troubled you with my own counter-narrative. Surrogacy clinicians and reproductive capitalists claim
Reproductive
that the
capitalists.
form-giving fire of willing proletarians' bodies the world over can be sort of cleanly borrowed for the purposes of baby making via discrete exchanges that leave behind them no ghostly trail, no trace of their maker. In other words, gestational labor can be temporarily hired on genuinely finite contracts, no more consequential to one's kinship, metaphysics, or one's sense of identity than a one-off understanding with a pet sitter off TaskRabbit. Indeed, part of the ontological framing that makes the brokerage of these rentals possible is a promise that as long as the genetic material of the would-be author or authors of a baby is successfully formatted into a zygote and presented for transfer, an impersonal uterine muscle will hygienically set about actualizing the design. Like an artist who barely touches the artwork she is officially authoring because she has a team of craftspeople and builders to do that for her. The intended procreator is reassured. Whoever the gestational muscle is part of will not, repeat, not, leave the sticky filaments of her identity anywhere on the finished living product. The surrogate will have no more claim on that product than an egg cup does over its boiled egg. The baby will not be her kin. So you can perhaps see where I'm trying to go with this, if you'll pardon me, embryonic project. The Bhopal disaster and its huge concentration of MIC poisoning provides this very sort of vivid node of a moment of toxic reproductive stratification. But whereas comparable gas disasters on American...
No, I mean, we know that most of you guys are against surrogacy because you want to hate gay people. We know. We got it. Believe me. I understand.
soil were cleaned up such that American children could continue to be born. Bhopali life was left to suffocate, weep. There were all these ocular problems, suffer infertility, and mutate. Sorry, there was a but there that didn't belong there. That is the stratification, right? But the stratification might be turning out to be fairly liquid and leaky after all, sort of failing to stay in its proper place. If indeed gestational surrogates have, as they most certainly have, been commissioned by parents from America to gestate American embryos, which then traveled to America upon being born, sort of full of Bhopali blood and guts. Failing to stay in one's proper place is in fact exactly what gestational surrogates are accused of in the anxious imaginary of surrogacy service consumers. In Full Surrogacy Now, I focused on one surrogacy capitalist's assurance that, and I quote, her employee surrogates will not come knocking, unquote, on the doors of the homes in the global north. And I used that in order to reflect on what it would mean for gestational laborers to perhaps be empowered to do just that and come knocking on the doors either of real homes or of proprietarian kinship models. And when we were talking before this lecture, Jean told me about a kind of fantasy of adoption models that might involve not just a child, but perhaps a sort of mother-child dyad, or perhaps some more. Just to sort of restate what Debelina Royce says in this paper on germline ruptures, as she calls it, and transposition.
Hang on, new viewer, our super. I mean, yeah, obviously super chats are definitely accepted. Welcome, appreciate it.
Transpositions of life and death, mediated by MIC via gas disaster on the one hand and the baby-making industry on the other. She's sort of proposing tracing, quote, the breaking down of Bhopali survivors' reproductive bodies, their genetics and their liquids due to MIC exposure, and simultaneously examining the building up of new fetal bodies through the genetics and liquids provided by Bhopali surrogates. And I just wanted to quote that because it's got so many liquids in it, and it reminds me that, you know, it was simple water that triggered the MIC gas holocaust. Amniotechnics is no laughing matter. It isn't easy, and it's a matter of life or death, whether it creates conditions of flourishing or drowns your kin. If chickens come home to roost, then during the transnational Indian surrogacy boom, Bhopali MIC made its way home via the bodies of sorrow babies commissioned by Americans. Can this circuit of historic molecular violence, whereby toxicity is returned to its place of origin through the labors of gestating Indian bodies, tell us something about the vengeful dimensions of hospitality and the cunning of a botched amniotechnics? Is Jean-Luc Nancy right that we must endeavor to stay exposed? I recognize that this basically brings us just back to the question that I proposed to you in my talk description. But sometimes I guess it's better to spend a lot of time getting a grip on one's question rather than venturing a premature set of conclusions. The story of the toxic sorrow babies and the sort of planetary loop that they travel evokes for me a sensibility of responsibility and parentality and transgenerational enmeshment vis-a-vis a sort of motley and multitudinous crew of poisoned reproductive service workers, living and dead. I am not sure that kinship is a strong enough category for the practices of xeno-hospitality and xeno-solidarity that are so urgently needed for us to live across the rifts of this damaged earth. And I hope we can learn to treat each other like strangers.
Sophie's argument is because the bourgeois are using the oppressed, poisoned mothers for surrogacy, thus producing the children in their poisoned bodies, that this is an argument for collectivizing care to make sure that the poisoned mothers who were poisoned by capitalism when capitalism caused an environmental crisis, we need to collectivize care to make sure those people are cared for without inequity under capitalism. So what she's trying to do is she's trying to say, like, this is because the rich people are using the poor people to literally create their children, thus passing on whatever genetics got destroyed when there was an environmental crisis due to capitalism. That's a reason that the rich people should care about the poor people, because they're like, do I have this argument right? Do people think I have that right? I'm not entirely convinced I do, but Sophie is trying to make the argument that this is like a reason to collectivize care for everyone so that everyone can have access to the same types of care. Because you don't want poisoned women producing your babies. Does that make sense?
That's what I say in the last chapter of this book. Thank you.
All right. And now the OBGYN from the University of Nebraska is going to respond to Sophie. Well, I don't know if there's a Q&A. I'm sure like we always hope there is, because Q&A is always the best part, but I'm not sure. I'm sure there probably will be, honestly, but anyway, let's listen to the response. from the woman in a
Oh,
mask.
Sophie, so amazing. I've just got so many.
Hang on, Rottweiler. Hang on. What does Rottweiler have to say? I think it's correct. Plus, she's making an implicit argument about collectivizing babies so they are property of everyone under the socialist state. Well, that's true as well, Rottweiler, because Sophie believes, I've literally heard Sophie say this, that everyone should have at least 3 sets of parents because children shouldn't be raised by their biological nuclear family because, like, based on kinship. They should be raised by everyone in the community with like multiple sets of parents. So I'm sure that's correct, Rottweiler.
Thoughts sort of swirling around for me. I'm going to focus in on what strikes me, I think the most is that is coming around to a man-made disaster seeming to possibly have a great chance for, being potentially an opening into a reckoning with this kind of practice. And it does just seem like, in even a broader sense, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, just as far as the idea of climate damage more generally, of man-made climate damage as being having the greatest potential for humans to start caring about people in distant places, because it all is going around and coming around. And this is such, like, on this very small and personal scale of a baby being made elsewhere. I mean, it is heartbreaking to me that even as you're outlining it, if not for the fact of these women serving as surrogates, this now would be unlikely. I mean, I think that's what draws the attention of the West back to it, is, oh no, this is coming right back to us. And where is their worth in its own right? Not as having any relation. So I don't know, I'm just curious of your thoughts on there's the heartbreak of it, but also the potential advantage of that globalization piece actually being an impetus for drawing attention to damage that we contribute to around the world. Yeah.
Didn't know whether you were going to talk more and I should build up questions, or whether I should respond
Oh.
now.
Well, go ahead. I'll keep asking questions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tension that you're identifying. Yeah, I think it's always got this kind of dual valence. I know what you mean, the story of sort of things becoming, attention-worthy again because of a startling, effect, an intimate, repercussion on the sort of centers of power culturally. I mean, on the other hand, I'm actually not sure that this, this possibility that the surrogacy industry might be sort of commissioning parents, radioactive babies. I mean, I shouldn't use words imprecisely like that, but the idea seems to me to be, the idea that would be covered is radioactive, because there is quite a lot invested in the industry, guaranteeing its provision of, cleanly realized progeny to its clients. So while there are these stories about airlifts out of, earthquake zones and, melodramas about Ukrainian surrogacy clinics. I actually haven't seen a lot of attention to this piece that Dabalina Roy is talking about. I guess you're also making me think about the duality of that production, right? Global North, Global South. Like I was saying, you are actually here because we were there. It's bi-directional, right? And when I think about Patricia Piccinini's, surrogate series, I sometimes wonder to myself whether she could do the other direction, the plastic children being sort of nurtured by the humans. Actually, I think she does do a few that are along those lines. I can think of one that is sort of a simian who is kind of cradling what looks like a sort of double-ended foot. But do you know what I mean? There's something there's always something there's a tension of some symbiogenesis in her pairings,
Right.
And I think sometimes she's purposely playing on that alarm that parents who think of their kids as their sort of exclusive property might feel if there was indeed this kind of naked wombat in Jimmy's cot, spooning him.
Right.
Like, it's an alarming idea. And I think she's saying the wombat is there in your child's cot, in a sense. Maybe that's a bit too much extrapolating, but it's the weird and the cyborg is present. The kids are avatars of this great sort of purity for no real reason. They don't burst forth, clean of history.
Well, I mean, the other thing that makes me think of is you were conjuring up that image of that these clinics would have really the audacity to guarantee, a good outcome. I mean, it's something. It's something, whether people are having a completely pregnancy that is conceived and carried with the lowest tech means possible. Of course, there's no guarantee. And the idea that people would imagine that to go to, cross these many steps, you're going way out of the area that you actually know. I mean, literally, physically, geographically. And through all this additional technology, in the spirit of this somehow enabling a better likelihood of a pure product at the end, is so misguided, even just in setting that out as a goal. It's remarkable. The other thing that I wanted to just touch on is I guess when we sort of try to parse out, like, I just was so taken in your talk tonight and in listening to the book just about this potential for society to have a broader concept of what parenthood, and I guess to be quite fair, probably more realistically motherhood, but if I'm being generous, I'll say parenthood, of how that broader, kind of that pluralistic idea of it might look. And it made me just think, sort of, what are the barriers to us?
They're talking about making parenthood pluralistic. how we should have a different conception of parenthood and motherhood?
Getting there? Is it that, why have we,
by the way,
come to this point?
The blinking is their video. It's not my video, it's their video.
Where we have such a ownership sense, even though we know, of course, that that's not the relationship between parents and children, but is it just merely a sense of control that
Wait.
if it's...
Do you guys hear that? She's talking about rethinking what parenthood is and motherhood is away from this sense of ownership. Because remember, these people don't believe that children belong to their parents. They believe children are like little adults that can make all their own decisions. I don't know what this means, Code Monkey. Poly relationships would need to normalize multi-parent households. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that? Because I don't understand. She's not rambling. She's not rambling. She said something very specific. You just have to listen to what she's saying.
Where we have such a ownership sense, even though we know, of course, that that's not the relationship between parents and children, but is it just merely a sense of control that if it's the smaller and smaller our families, the tighter, I guess I should say, the family is, rather than the shared sort of parenting that could go on, that does go on in some places, and that almost surely went on much more, goes on in places that don't have, I think, really the same kind of capitalist bent.
Bing, capitalist.
But that is it the, what do you think is sort of the driving need there? To my mind, it sort of was coming up as, is it our need for kind of control again? I compare it to just our approach to, say, all sorts of social welfare that we have, and that we sacrifice in the spirit of, I'll just keep.
Hang on. Poly relationships are usually well, no, that's not true. There are polyamorous people that are not socialists. So I would never start with the assumption that anyone polyamorous is socialist, because that's just not true. And they have multiple adults, while poly relationships do have multiple adults, and it would require them to normalize. What do you mean by normalize? I don't think you've thought this through, because I think you're starting with the assumption that all poly people are socialist, and that's not a correct assumption to start with. Also, socialists don't normalize anything because they're against normativity. And so you using the term normalize, maybe it's a like, that's fucking this into. I don't understand what you mean by this. But that doesn't mean that that every single poly relationship is socialist, so you need to dispense with the assumption that you're making. Also, socialists are not in favor of normalizing anything.
More and more, lower taxes, and I'll keep more and more, and then I can do better for my little tiny corner of the world. Rather than, if we all do better, we all do better, this kind of idea. And I feel like that's that same logic gets applied to parenting of, I'm just going to pour everything into my little vessel. And I don't know if there's just that we let pride get wrapped up in it, or is it a control that I can have more control over this one individual. So anyway, I'm just curious about the kind of the grand idea of this broader parenting.
Tayton says, parents are individualists, not collectivists in this argument. Yep, that's true, because parents are the owners of private property. Code Monkey, again, these people don't want to normalize anything. In this article, they mentioned social reproduction theory in the global north about poly. All right, thank you, bot.
Model. And what you think are the kind of just societal barriers for that?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, part of me, wants to sort of index that there's a very complicated history of enclosure that over many centuries that sort of generated the invention of the, private nuclear household.
Oh! The invention of the
But,
private
this kind of
nuclear
answer
household.
is going to be, well, I do have some other sort of psychological and cultural thoughts. I think, so in one sense, the family in that mode became progressively over time the organizing principle for care in society. And it's
what Sophie is saying is that if you needed care, no, hang on, that's not what's being said. Okay, let's go back. What Sophie believes is that capitalism created the gender binary that put women in oppressed gender roles in the home and men in the workplace where they were able to make money. Women in those oppressed gender roles in the home bear and raise the children, which become the future generation of proletariat workers. So in this model of thinking, capitalism created the gender binary creates the nuclear family, and it is within the nuclear family that the future generation of proletariat workers is literally produced to uphold capitalism. So she's not saying the nuclear household is new. She's saying that capitalism created the nuclear family. And in order to get rid of capitalism, which is their ultimate goal, they need to get rid of the nuclear family because the nuclear family is what upholds capitalism by continuing to reproduce the proletariat workers who will be oppressed under capitalism. Does everyone understand that? If you have questions, now's the time to ask, honestly, guys. And if there's anyone new that has questions about this, this is a fundamental concept that people need to understand. So I would prefer people to ask questions if they're confused. There's no shame in being confused. Precisely. Capitalism created the nuclear family, and the nuclear family upholds capitalism through social reproduction theory because existing social systems will reproduce themselves. No, it is not. No, wrong, incorrect. Nope. Not correct, Jacob. I'm sorry. Nope, this is not correct. Jacob, this is a time when you need to remind yourself that you are in my class, and this is not going to fly. Capitalism is the problem. Capitalism is always the problem. Capitalism is defined as private property ownership. It is not defined as anything else. Capitalism is not a scapegoat. Capitalism is the core of what these people believe is the problem. What are you confused about in that regard? Stop debunking right now. You know the rules. That is not what we do here. Well, what you believe is wrong, and you have entered into my classroom right now. And so if you want to bring incorrect beliefs into my classroom, they will be corrected in the classroom, and you can either accept that or you can leave. The nuclear family is also well, yes, capitalism is the bourgeois. The bourgeois is the capitalist class. No, you're not saying what their point of view is, Jacob. You are fundamentally confused and you're not listening because you're being defensive. Why is it called the nuclear family? I honestly don't know, Rachel. I don't know. I'm just using their language. Jacob, you're either going to give us a clear answer of what you think or you're going to be removed. Because you're being asked. You claim that capitalism isn't the problem, then what do you think the problem is? No, Jacob, we're not the ones who are confused. You're the one who's confused. We're waiting. Nope, that's not what it is. Nope, that's not what it is. Nuclear as in nucleus, the center. Marriage is not required for the nuclear family. No, it's not. Capitalism is not a scapegoat. Capitalism is the core of the problem, Jacob. In these people's minds, capitalism creates every single problem, every single inequity, and they believe if we just abolish capitalism, which they define explicitly and exclusively as private property ownership, then all problems will be solved. Jacob, you need to okay, Jacob, I'm very sorry. I'm not going to continue to argue with you. You are wrong. Your ideas are wrong. You are either going to be here to learn. No, Jacob, this is wrong. You are either going to be here to learn or you are going to be removed. So do you want to learn or do you want me to remove you from the chat? When people come into my chat and give incorrect answers, they will be corrected. If those people want to argue with me, instead of listening and understanding, all right, you are incorrect when you say capitalism is a scapegoat. Capitalism is not their scapegoat. Capitalism is their number one enemy. They define capitalism as private property ownership. They believe capitalism is responsible for every problem in the world. You need to start there. And I don't want to hear any more argument. That is what these people think. Anything outside of that is just incorrect. I'm sorry. It's confusing that the bourgeois families want to produce the next generation of proletariat workers in their model. Not every family is bourgeois. So no one said that every nuclear family is part of the bourgeois class in their eyes. How many nuclear families are part of the proletarian class? The vast majority of them. The proletarian families are producing the next generation of proletarian workers. The mistake that you made was assuming that every nuclear family is a bourgeois nuclear family. Do they believe that the nuclear family is the foundation that capitalism sits on, so destroy that and capitalism falls? Yes. Yes, that is a really good way to put it. Jacob, again, she's not the one that's confused. You're the one that's confused. All right, let's keep going.
A privatization of care, right? Not everybody
hang on. I'm gonna back up.
sort of.
I'm gonna back up a little bit because I forgot where we left off in the arguing with people in my chat. Okay, Jacob, this is your last fucking chance. One of the rules of my chat is you will not argue with me. You are in my fucking class. You are a student in my class that is now barged into the room, started arguing with the teacher, started arguing with other people in the class when you just fucking got here and obviously and clearly don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So you're either going to take a seat and shut your mouth and listen to what's being said, or you're going to be removed from the class, because you are not the teacher of this class, Jacob. I am the teacher of this class. So sit the fuck down, open your ears, and listen, or get the fuck out. Destroy the nuclear family? Wouldn't that destroy society? Patty, they don't want to maintain society in its current form. They want their version of the world. Their version. The 4 goals of the woke left are always and forever the same. Gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. They don't want society as it currently exists. They want the Marxist utopia. So yeah, destroying the nuclear family would fundamentally change society, and that is a feature, that is not a bug. No, Jacob, he doesn't think that. None of us think that. That's not what this is. Sit the fuck down and shut up, or we're going to remove you. This is the last warning. There's always someone, I swear to God, there's always fucking someone.
The answer is going to be, well, I do have some other sort of psychological and cultural thoughts. I think, so in one sense, the family in that mode became progressively over time the organizing principle for care in society. And it's a privatization of care, right?
So Sophie has just argued, because we're not talking to Jacob anymore. I don't want Jacob getting any more fucking attention than he's already gotten. Sophie has just argued that the nuclear family privatizes care. Pop quiz for the chat. Why does the nuclear family privatize care? Why does the nuclear family privatize care? It's not just the child, but only the family is responsible for the child, not society. It's not just the child. The family blocks the... Well, that's not exactly right, Tom. I don't know what you mean by that, Kristen. Not exactly. Because the care is exclusive to their own genetically authored property. That's part of it. Maybe like 25% of it. Children are seen as private property, but that's not explaining why the nuclear family privatizes care. None of you have it so far. The nuclear family perpetuates the individual aspect of capitalism, which they think is... Rottweiler, come on, you can do better than this. That's not correct. That's not right. The family takes care of each other to the exclusion of others. That's maybe 50% correct, Kurt. Because you're taking care of your own family, 50% correct. It's not about children being private property. Okay. The nuclear family, no one got the answer correct, by the way. The nuclear family privatizes care because care for everyone, for the young, for the middle-aged, and for the elderly, the access that you have to resources for care, to include medical care, to include mental health care, that is provided to you based on the family that you were born into. It's not hard for your, okay, I need everyone to shut up for a second and listen. It is not hard for her to explain her theory. I understand what she's saying. You guys are not currently understanding what she's saying because you're not listening. No, not correct, Jacob. Sorry, not correct. I need everyone to be quiet and I need everyone to listen. And I'm going to start from the beginning again. I don't want any more fucking answers in the chat right now. Sophie is saying that the nuclear family privatizes care because the resources of care that you have access to Michelle is now getting banned from the chat because Michelle is continuing to complain in the chat, so Michelle can show herself out. She is permanently banned from the chat. Goodbye, Michelle. Does anyone else want to be permanently banned from the chat when I'm trying to explain something that you should damn well fucking be listening to as you're in my classroom right now? Yes. Bot is correct. In case of capitalism, it depends on how much money your family has, what type of care and Jacob is still talking when I'm trying to explain something. Okay, Jacob, I'm going to ask you one singular question, and your answer to this question will dictate whether or not you are banned from this chat permanently for coming in and monumentally disrupting everything. Why does the left want to abolish the nuclear family? You know everything, Jacob. You're perfectly fine barging into my class, being disruptive, getting the whole thing off track, not fucking listening to what's being told to you, not only by me, but by other people in the chat. Now you're going to be put on the hot seat, and I don't want anyone else answering this question. I want Jacob and Jacob alone answering this question. And Jacob's answer to this question, because Jacob is the big smarty pants that knows fucking everything, that can barge into my fucking class and tell me what I should be teaching. Jacob, why does the left want to abolish the nuclear family? Your next chat will be the answer to that, and I will either keep you or ban you based on your answer. This is not correct. You get one more try. Why does the left want to abolish the nuclear family? This is not correct in any way, shape, or form. You get one more chance. Jacob is obviously a conservative. Yeah. Why does the left want to abolish the nuclear family, Jacob? Oh, you don't know? You don't know? You're just coming in and disrupting my chat? Jacob is now banned. Jacob is permanently banned. Goodbye, Jacob. All right. Now that we have removed the distraction from the chat, we're going back to this, and I'm going to rewind this. The question that we have now been painstakingly, and guys, by the way, this is why I don't allow this bullshit in this chat, because this is what happens every single fucking time. A conservative comes in and they think they know everything and they think they don't need to listen, and they just cause fucking disruption and chaos, even when everyone tries to like correct them and get them on the right track. The question that I was asking was, why does the nuclear family what does Sophie mean when she's saying the nuclear family privatizes care? The answer to that is that the amount of care that you have access to is dependent directly upon the resources that your nuclear family have access to. If you are a rich family, you will have access to greater resources for care than if you are in a poor family. That's what Sophie means when she says the nuclear family privatizes care, is that the nuclear family is the primary delivery mechanism for care. And your access to resources will be entirely dependent upon the amount of money that your family has under the system of capitalism. So rich people are going to have greater access to resources. Rich people, or the bourgeois, the capitalist class, they're going to have greater access to care resources than poor people who are the oppressed proletarian, kind of like hourly worker, stuff like that. Sophie's idea is that if we get rid of the nuclear family, then we will create an environment in which surrogacy is for everyone. Now, when I say surrogacy in this sense, I'm using it in quotes because Sophie doesn't mean surrogacy as in having babies. That's not what she means in this sense. She means that everyone will take care of everyone else. We will all be a surrogate for everyone else. That's what she means in this sense, and it's really important to understand that because we hear surrogacy and we think that it's just all about having babies, and there is a reality in which that's being referenced. But when Sophie is saying it in this sense, she means everyone will be responsible for everyone else, and everyone will have access to the same resources as everyone else. And that will produce equity, which means we will not have, yes, like socialist healthcare, like socialized healthcare, like universal healthcare. Does everyone understand that? Yes, Sophie is as young as she looks. Yes, she is. Okay, now let's listen again.
Mode became progressively over time the organizing principle for care in society, and it's a privatization of care, right? Not everybody individually sort of willing it thus, but it becoming a form of sort of organized austerity that isn't perceived or even experienced that way because it is abundance, or the closest thing we have to that, right? It's on the individual level, right? So an individual person thinks, oh, bloody hell, I can't criticize, the family because family is all I have. And that's kind of, it's a sort of bizarre Ouroboros where, because it's all you have, it becomes all you have. Like it can only be all you have because, and I think the same thing kind of applies to relationships with children, which have been kind of almost criminalized, like in certain ways, or like, okay, that's a big word. I think there's suspicion cast on relationships with children since the 80s, where, big moral panics were sort of ginned up around the specter of the pedophile, which is a tactic
The specter of the
appearing
pedophile.
to care about abuse.
So I'm hearing socialists and conservatives are both bad? Yes! Yes, socialists and conservatives are two sides of the same coin. That is for sure.
That in fact authorizes a lot of different kinds of abuse. And, it used to be fairly common in the late 60s and 70s to talk about how bad of a system private nuclear households are for children, because that's where the vast majority of abuse happens. And it's not just children that suffer, and not just trans children either. It's also kind of everyone and women. And it seems...
I just want to point something out. that's separate from what Sophie's saying right now. And what Sophie's saying is important. We're going to get back to that in a second. I just want to point out, though, that had Jacob just followed the instructions that he had been given and he had shut up and stopped chatting and had just listened, he wouldn't be banned right now. Guys, problems start in this arena when people don't shut their mouths and open their ears and start listening. The entire basis of what we're doing is around listening and making sure we understand what people are saying. Part of the problem that we have right now is that no one on the right is actually listening to what these people are saying. And they're coming up with all these crazy stories and crazy explanations for why things are happening. And those explanations that they're inventing out of nowhere have no basis in actual reality. And do you guys know how many problems conservatives create when they refuse to listen to what these people have to say? They attack the wrong problem. They make a big deal out of nothing. They don't implement tactics that are actually designed to solve the problem because they don't even understand what the fucking problem is. We saw that at the end with Jacob. Jacob quite literally did not understand what the problem is. Jacob was entirely incapable of articulating what the problem was, and yet he bursts in to our class. He makes himself the center of attention by arguing with everyone, and he did so without even understanding what the actual problem was. Now, the only reason that we know that everything that Jacob was saying was completely unhinged from reality is because we have spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours listening to these people, and we've heard them say it over and over and over and over and over again. And exactly, he ran in, and conservatives do this all the time. He ran in and started lecturing us without actually listening to what was being said or even understanding what we were doing. And I really want to point this out to everyone, because this not listening bullshit is what has caused the problem in the first place. If someone tells you to stop talking and to start listening, and all you continue to do is go me, you're not there for the conversation at that point. You're only there to hear yourself talk. All right, let's just go back a little bit. Sophie is talking about one of the arguments that Sophie makes against the nuclear family is that the family is where all the abuse against children occurs, and therefore, because the nuclear family is like the epicenter for abuse of children, it is bad.
To care about abuse, that in fact authorizes a lot of different kinds of abuse. And it used to be fairly common in the late 60s and 70s to talk about how bad of a system private nuclear households are for children, because that's where the vast majority of abuse happens. And it's not just children that suffer, and not just trans children either. It's also kind of everyone and women. And it seems sort of almost shocking or weird to talk about these observations now because of the naturalization of the family as the only place you could possibly be, right, in the world. But I still kind of want to say it, that the family is where you are most likely to be raped and murdered and robbed.
See?
And inflicted unwanted touch or blackmailed.
No, I don't think that Sophie is just projecting because she has daddy issues. I mean, I experienced more mental abuse, more emotional abuse in my life from my own parents than I did from anyone else. Most people experience emotional, if not physical, abuse from their parents. The vast majority. So no, I don't think this is just I think this Sophie's actually, guys, like, Sophie is actually, if you don't think that parents fuck up their kids, this is like what conservatives don't get. It's like conservatives think that like all parents are perfect, and telling conservatives to shut up and listen because you're afraid to hear their solutions. I need to puke. What a waste of time. I'll ban myself from this shit. Go fuck yourself, Jim. See, Jim again. Jim is the type of conservative. Jim is having some feelings. I thought we were going to start the year better than this, but no. Whiny conservatives fucking up our Socialism Saturday. Yet again. Jim is having some feelings because Jim doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. And if Jim wants to be banned from this shit, Jim can be banned from this shit. Goodbye, Jim. Goodbye, Jim. I swear to God. Every single goddamn time. No, I can't, because that's not what we're doing here right now. And if that's what you want to do, you can go on a timeout. Now all the conservatives are getting all in their feelings in my chat. Now all the conservatives are getting all in their fucking feelings instead of listening. Does anyone else want to remove themselves? Does anyone else want to take their toys and go home because they can't be bothered to listen? Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay. Rottweiler, thank you for the super chat. Conservatives tend to debunk and pathologize based on their own anecdotal evidence and values without understanding what Marxists truly believe. Perfect example is this is a gay agenda argument. That's exactly right. And this is why conservatives will always lose, because conservatives don't know how to fucking listen. And they are far more emotional than leftists can ever dare dream to be. And they just can't help but have an emotional reaction to being told to shut the fuck up for once in their lives and listen to what other people are saying. And then when they don't get their way and you don't express the talking points that they are just desperate to hear, conservatives have a massive fucking temper tantrum in the middle of your fucking living room that disrupts everything for everyone. And then they wonder why no one likes them and no one wants to hang out with them. And God knows no one wants to vote for their candidates because they're such assholes and fuck up almost everything they come into contact with. Why do conservatives constantly need to be affirmed just like they're leftists? Exactly. Why do conservatives constantly need a gold star? They need to be told that they're always right, that they are stunning and brave and beautiful. Exactly. Anyway, so going back to the topic at hand, because I don't really want to continue with the arguing. Sophie is not wrong when she says that the vast majority of abuse happens in the family. I speak your language, bro. I speak the language of conservative oftentimes better than conservatives do. It's why I know who's a conservative and who's not. I speak conservative just as well as I speak socialist. Sophie is not wrong when she says that abuse takes place in the nuclear family. Conservatives don't want to acknowledge this because they have this Rockwellian idea that the nuclear family is perfect and that parents always have the best interests of their child at heart. No, they don't. Nope. Parents fuck up their kids. Conservative parents fuck up their kids. Liberal parents fuck up their kids. socialist parents fuck up their kids. So this is actually a point in which Sophie is correct. Now, that doesn't mean we should destroy the nuclear family. I would actually posit that the challenges that people go through in childhood make them who they are. You cannot experience a childhood without trauma. Every childhood will have trauma. Some traumas will be objectively worse than other traumas, but this idea that no parents fuck up their kids. Oh yeah, libertarians fuck up their kids too. The idea that no parents fuck up their kids is just wrong, objectively. Anyway.
You know, it's a too seldom discussed thing that even the police, that extremely not liberatory feminist institution, sort of knows that when a woman calls up and doesn't understand why all of her credit cards have been maxed out and her bank accounts are empty and she's been a victim of identity fraud, it's always the boyfriend or the husband, literally, apparently, always, you know, like a vast majority. And, you know, the police know that enough to simply have that as a policy of first, you know, inquiry.
Right.
And I guess, I mean, I'm not trying to villainize heterosexuality per se, right? It's not like, I'm not really into that trend in a sense of kind of making out that there's no hope or pleasure or joy to be found in that domain. I think that's a strange trend that's come about, I think, among some you know, as a young queer feminist, to sort of imply that all would be well if everyone would just sort of embrace queerness, when it's not clear whether queerness in that setting means a critique of private property, whether it means a critique of, you know, racialization, or, you know, there are lots of things to discuss about that. And I'm sort of going way off tangent now. But yeah, I think one of the things about the drive to go and have your own progeny made to order is in part that you know, it is actually quite hard to have children in your life unless you go and do that. And the 80s succeeded, I think, in really privatizing not just care, which is the main thing, but also sort of you know, social life. And I wonder if it were more, if, you know, if we managed to sort of start a movement of contestation of the idea that it's kind of sus, like, you know, they're suspicious to, in a sense, like, parent all children, you know, to feel responsible for all children.
Ding, ding, ding.
Then there wouldn't be that kind of sense of starvation of that kind of contact and communion that leads to this sort of kind of bizarre resort to outsourcing. Yeah, my friend visited a commune in Virginia and said that it was like a wonderful sort of shock to her system to witness children being kind of really like unclearly anybody's kid, and everybody, you know, told the kid not to eat the rock. Like, obviously, I mean, right. Probably we would all tell it. I don't know. Would you? I mean, that's an interesting question. You know, I was on the subway one time, and a very small person asked me whether I was a girl or a boy, because I had a buzzed head at the time.
I should visit a commune.
And I said, I'm not actually sure. What do you think? And they said, a girl because of your dress and a boy because of your head. And I said, and what about you? And at that point, a parent, I think a mother, just absolutely freaked out and sort of removed the kid physically from my presence. But I think conversations with kids on subways should be mandatory.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's interesting because it is one of these licenses that I hadn't expected when I had a child, that it allowed me into a circle of societally being able to talk to children who weren't mine.
Yeah.
And really before that, even, I mean, there's certainly women have a little more, I think, are allotted, a bit more ability to do that without drawing a lot of skepticism, but even, as your example. But yeah, it's amazing how narrowly we keep that to really the advantage of no one.
Mm-hmm.
But it's now such a built up societal structure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, questions
That's
from
a
the
wonderful
room?
remarks.
So a few things. I couldn't help but see the analogy with slavery, surrogate parents with slavery, and that, with, the Americas, England, Spain, all these countries that participated in slavery in some respect came back to bite them, and then eventually people like in Jamaica now have this beautiful country and they're free from the history. But anyway, it seems really like it's going to be buried under a rock, and somebody like you is overturning the rock, because I had not known any of this occurred until hearing your talk tonight, and it was really pretty incredible. The other thing is, you mentioned at one point genetically that they've done something to be able to erase the background of the surrogate mother in the genes. Is that what I heard correctly from you?
Oh,
You showed an image of the connections of the, and it looked like you had little nicks in it or something like that.
oh yeah. Sorry, it's quite strange if you're. It's actually quite simple. So traditional surrogacy is what they call implantation of an embryo that has used the surrogate's egg, and then gestational. I don't know why they call it that. It's all obviously gestational, but it's where there is no genetic material from her involved.
It rents the womb.
Yeah.
Rents the womb.
Yeah.
With the egg and the sperm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there's a whole dimension of epigenetic impacts on the fetus. So I mean, I'm oversimplifying, and I'm also not. I mean, I'm a bit cringing to think what I might have got slightly wrong when Jean's a medical scholar, but but I think there are, broadly speaking, ideologies that compete here around authorship. Is an embryo simply a kind of like a result of some program code that you put together with simply two sources, and then the all these metaphors, the oven is just that, right? Just heat or just oxygen or whatever. And there's there are all kinds of other things to say about how it actually works. Donna Haraway says that, I mean, this is a very provocative thought that I don't expect to understand anytime soon, but that reproduction doesn't really happen in our species because of the way that DNA doesn't actually sort of replicate in the process of sexuate reproduction. But epigenetics is interesting, and I'm sure much debated, and I'm sure people have quite wild and contested claims about how much goes on. But epigenetic means environmental, right? So regardless of what the genetic profile is of the thing that you're gestating, the fact that you are gestating it will make a difference. Will have an impact. Will trace, and there will be, there's all kinds of generational things that are being studied that can be passed on, generational traumas, generational exposures and risks. So it's not about tinkering to sort of cut something off. In fact, one of the points I kind of really want to insist on is that despite all the technological razzle dazzle, you know, pregnancy is kind of pregnancy is kind of pregnancy in a way. Like it doesn't, the body doesn't discriminate very much about what embryo it gestates.
But the embryo, if it's conceived or if the DNAs of both the woman and the man are joined as an embryonic start, and then it's put into the womb, it has no history of the DNA of the surrogate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's not carried by that, but it's just a wrinkle flat.
But the DNA of any fetus is just as different.
Right.
No, seriously, that's an important point to understand.
Whether there's a portion of it or some partition
Doesn't make a
affects it
difference.
because it's in the womb.
Um,
In a growth manner.
You know what this makes me think of is when we think about the transplanted uterus.
yeah.
And the fact of that the woman's body or the person's body where the uterus has been transplanted, that she's very likely, she needs medication and whatnot, she's very likely to reject that organ, as happens with any transplanted organ. So she's got to have all sorts of medications. But any embryo that gets put into that organ, not a problem. That's just the basics of reproduction. Yeah. So whether I'm pregnant with an embryo that is half of my DNA combined with somebody's sperm, or
Someone else's egg.
an egg that is my sister's egg, so it's kind of like me, or somebody completely unrelated to me, it makes no difference. Which is amazing. I mean, when you think about it, that again, it would make a big difference if it were, say, my sister's uterus transplanted into me versus somebody remotely not related to me at all. That would very unlikely be a good match. So,
I mean, looking ahead, say, 10 years out from here, lineage. It's a very important thing with certain families to document, to know their lineage of who they came from and going as far back as they can. And they pronounce this in countries if they have any kind of royal backing. But DNA, the genomics of an individual, the cost of that is coming down super fast. And I expect probably in 10 years, we'll all be able to have a code that we can understand where disease is coming from and various things like that. But these babies that are born through surrogacy or so would be able to know what their pathway is back if there's the surrogate mother or the implant, or there's some kind of trace of that in the genomics from the mother. I mean, it's kind of like, adopted kids who don't know who their parents are, and when they get older, they want to meet their parents and go out and find that. But it will be, but it will be uncovered in time, but it's just like a dirty secret now. As you're describing, what happens, that these couples want either a pet or a kid, and they go to such extremes to go to, as long as they can pay for it, they'll do it. Thank you for your talk tonight.
Thank you.
So once again, thank you for the wonderful lecture. There were a couple of things that you said that really intrigued me and causes me to think further, just kind of like about the power dynamics and politics of this.
Thanks, Taco. Appreciate it.
Because when you're looking at people from the global north going to the global south to rent a home, you look at the politics of that, because why is that happening, that exchange happening? There's a power imbalance, which is what kind of triggered my mind when you said if they would have power.
See, conservatives like to advance this idea that the left is just against Western people and Western identity, which when conservatives say Western, they mean white people, and they actually mean people with white skin. But the reality is that the left doesn't actually think about it in terms of West and East. The left never talks about the West. They never talk about Western values. They never talk about that at all. What the left talks about is the global North and the global South, where the global North are considered to be the capitalist bourgeois oppressors, and the global South, the North is the Northern Hemisphere, the South is the Southern Hemisphere. The global South are considered to be the brown people who are oppressed under capitalism. Does everyone understand the difference? The left, no. This has nothing to do with religion. No. They don't care about West versus East. They care about the global North versus the global South. And by the way, the global South is where there have been socialist revolutions. Do you want to know why the left cares about the global South? It's because this is where the socialist revolutions have occurred, in the Southern Hemisphere. Does that make sense to everyone? Whiteness does mean bourgeois. Bourgeois, capitalist, it means the same thing. They talk about the global North versus the global South like all the time. They have for years.
To go knock on their doors and say, hey, because we kind of have to be bold to do that. And I feel like that's triggers why that exchange is happening, because surrogacy can happen within any country. To the best of my knowledge, I don't know any country where it's illegal, particularly in the global North too.
It's illegal in most states in the US and in the UK and in a lot of countries in Europe. It's also, sorry to interrupt, it's often 10 times more expensive to rent a California.
Oh, that's my point.
surrogate.
That's exactly the point I'm getting at, because you're going to the global South because
it's a market.
It's more affordable, in quotes. And then the part that you're doing that because it's more affordable. You're doing that because I feel this could be me implying that in terms of the power play, there would be a less chance of this person knocking at your door to demand for some kind of interaction with a child in the future.
I was so pleased I found that quote by the surrogacy clinician, because it was so precise. She really said, she's very brazen. And
do these academics even consider conservatives to be a threat at all when they're so easily distracted? No, they don't. They don't consider conservatives to be a real threat at all. They rarely talk about it. They are far more, socialists are far more concerned about the threat of the neoliberals or the Democrats than they are by the conservatives, by like a factor of 10.
It's very kind of, she literally says, the thing that people like about my clinic is, my employees are not going to come knocking on their doors in Paris or whatever.
And that's not because they're not curious. No. That's because of the power dynamics that's going on over there. And then just kind of finally, just looking at it all in terms of, what's the word? Migration. Mm-hmm. When you point out like the fact that a child that was cooked in India or, in Nepal, comes over to Palestine, to what was the country you said, and can become Israel and become a citizen because the person, but someone from Palestine who's been in Israel can't be a citizen. So looking at all of that, it's just interesting. That's what I'm So thank you very much.
Thank you. Actually, I'll just quickly say that I was glad that slavery was mentioned, because the one of the things in feminist anti-surrogacy discourse was actually an interesting conversation between Black feminists and white feminists who had differing assessments of how new these quote-unquote new reproductive technologies really were in the American context. So I think it was in the mid-80s, a big surrogacy case caused a huge, and this is traditional surrogacy, so the egg and belonged to the surrogate, so it was half of her genetics. She changed her mind. There was a Supreme Court case about it. There was the Coalition Against Surrogacy was founded, and a lot of radical feminists of the sort of 80s variant, broadly speaking, my least favorite of all the feminisms, did a lot of very sort of apocalyptic discourse about the slavery. They didn't mind using that word, that these poor women were being subjected to. So they would have long lists of women, often white, Latina, sort of lower middle class, working class, who they didn't always bother to ask whether they felt they were indeed sort of enslaved by this economic transaction. And then people like actually Angela Davis even wrote back against this and said, look, not to say that the emerging industry in gestational labor is all great, far from it, but it's not as sort of new and spectacularly frightening in that sense to us as it clearly is to you, because Black women were, in a very real sense, surrogates on the plantation, given that it was precisely the ownership relation of motherhood that was not granted to them, right, when they gave birth. There's there's still a lot of tension between feminists who want to create a real exception around surrogacy as a kind of work that women should never do, and others who argue, and I'm in this camp really, that the industry is terrible, and so are very many industries, and the way to address industries being terrible is to work sort of in and against them, in solidarity with and led by the people who are actually doing that work, and listening to their horizons and their immediate demands and needs, and not sort of moralizing over their heads in the thought that criminalizing something or morally mandating it out of existence actually does anything to change the fact that things we would not like to have commodified are commodified, and that's where we are at in the present. And those sorts of humanitarian mechanisms literally have been demonstrated to not do anything for the people who need it. I hope that was relevant.
One of the things it makes me think of is just going back to the organ issue, the organ transplantation, is just the international market for organs. And you sort of feel like when you do a kind of compare and contrast there, part of where I feel, because I was just thinking as you were talking, would a better solution be to say all these countries, wealthy countries that have good rules of law and that sort of thing, should figure out a way to open this back up and get the rules right around it, like have the workers, contribute to, rather than just making it illegal in the UK or in the US. But it's still because that is what we have as far as organ transplants go. The vast majority of folks, even if they could afford to go to get an organ from another country, okay, where you could buy and sell organs, they don't do it. They continue on the wait list in the country where they reside. Well, there's a few reasons. I mean, you can't bring the organ here. It's not going to wait that long. You have to be in that country. And so it's like that you as the individual have something on the line, where here it's that, at least I think it's the perception for the couples, that they're not sacrificing anything. I mean, I think for any of us to imagine undergoing a kidney transplant terrifying enough in a place where we understand how the medical system works. But to imagine having that done in India, people do it, but it's not like, oh, well, if it were illegal in the US, that it would just be go to the, lowest common denominator. Anyway, I don't know if that makes sense at all, but just that it's like, no, we figured out a way to make it's not a commercial entity here. So it's not like it's a market, and people continue to then utilize the system that we have here rather than going somewhere where they could get an organ faster. But it's because they would take on very real risks to do that. Where when they have a gestational surrogate in a poor country, where there's no
have fun,
regulations,
Vince. Have
the
fun.
only person taking on risk there is the surrogate, really.
All right, guys, we got about 10 minutes left. I know this is a longer one. I know there was some yelling earlier with conservatives not wanting to hear things they don't want to hear. That's just the way it goes sometimes. But we do have about 10 minutes left. I want to thank everyone who came out for Socialism Saturday. It was a big one tonight. We got a lot of good stuff at the beginning, but we are going to listen to the end just in case, because it's those rare times when we don't listen until the end that they say the quiet part out loud right when you don't expect it. So we are going to wrap things up tonight. But guys, please make sure you mount the like button as you are departing. I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. As a reminder, we do this every Saturday at 6 p.m. and I hope I'll see you guys next week if you are not afraid to come back, because you might be yelled at in the chat from being an uppity dick. I mean, it's really simple, guys. Don't be a dick in my chat and you won't get yelled at.
I mean, at least as far as physical risks, that the couple is not.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely, agree in a sense. And then I also have these sort of instincts that I've kind of come over time to sort of have to counterbalance and to sort of to remind us that there are other perspectives in this that we can attempt in solidarity to lean towards, if not adopt ourselves, because it is highly unlikely, I think, that for instance, I don't want to speak for everyone in the room, but there's a sort of level of risk and injury to the sort of job of being a surrogate that makes it unlikely, I think, for most people to be enrolled or recruited into that. There are some kind of boutique surrogacy workers in quite privileged situations who have sort of a passion, for doing pregnancy and who have the very, very, very best health insurance.
All right, guys, I'm going to hit the little socialist room one more time before we conclude. I apologize. Everyone take notes while I'm gone, okay? I'll be right back.
In fact, there are military wives who have the very, very, very best health insurance in the US and who use that health insurance to do pregnancy as a kind of boutique craft service while their husbands are on deployment. True story. It's a whole thing. But I also think the sort of bird's eye view of thinking about policy and should surrogacy happen, and it often means that we err towards the position of the commissioning parent and the consumer. And I'm not saying that these things are one for one, because they are not, but I think it's still useful to compare with the sex industry. I think we would want to talk about, at least I would want to talk about how to, give sex workers what they need to be safe, to be well.
Give sex workers what they need. What the fuck did I miss?
And sort of end of story, right? and I think talk about whether the sex industry should exist and whether, is less interesting to me typically, right? I would not typically go into that. And while I am interested in a sense in why and how baby making happens, right, and is wanted, and how much of it, I wonder if the two conversations need to be kept a tiny bit apart, right? Like, the reality is people do come and try and hire gestational labor, as I call it. And so you know, I don't know if, I think, do you see what I mean? I think there's two conversations, like surrogates.
I had to be fast. It was the end of the
Need,
presentation.
I think, a similar
ran
set
my
of
hands
things
under
as
the
sex
water.
workers do, really. You know, certain kinds of, you know, automatic access to things like healthcare, but you know, most people in the US don't have that, right? I wonder if some of these logics, when we pull on them, sort of, you know, bring us to the need for universal, you know, socialized healthcare.
Oh, there it is.
And,
There it is.
you know, things like
Sophie.
that, right? Which would, but I mean, I suppose it's all interconnected, you know, if as a, yeah.
Well, it makes me feel like as long as it's so international and you're crossing these boundaries that have completely different laws from one place to, it's like, I mean,
I'm not eating, John.
there, you will have places where as they are in this clinic, as you had outlined, of where the women are housed, but could be, you know, could certainly, there could be an argument to have them in a situation where everything that they do is quite closely monitored. I mean, I don't, you know.
Oh yeah, no, they are monitored. It's
so that
you know,
it's almost an imprisonment in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you know, absolutely. And also, you know, have you heard about the way that Amazon warehouse workers are surveilled every second of their lives, right? Like, you know, surveillance is a really common part of jobs right now. And yeah, absolutely. Being a surrogate in Dr. Naina Patel's clinic involves surveillance, involves boredom. Yeah, it involves lots of things, you know. And there are really interesting things that some of them say about the craft that they bring to the gestating that they do, you know. So that's a part that's often missed in the treatments that are quite sensationalizing and that really want to sort of, you know, just cut straight to the most sort of weird and, you know, melodramatic and sentimental moments, and don't necessarily want to hear about how boring it is to be a surrogate worker and how they have kind of ideas that have developed over time in one clinic. So, you know, labor knowledge that is shared and developed and passed around about how, like, a French embryo needs a certain kind of approach, whereas like an Indian embryo, and like, you know, you eat certain kinds of food. If it's an Indian embryo, it will want spicy food and like stuff like that. And, you know, I think it's important to listen and to believe people when they say that this is a better job than most of the other available, or all of the other available shitty jobs, like crushing glass, garment labor, farm work. You know, some people in Naina Patel's clinic talked about having a holiday from their husband. And that is also quite picked up a lot in Western treatments, because as you know from my book, there's a sort of bizarre desire to see almost a sort of feminism in the, you know, the dormitory full of pregnant women who get to not do housework for 8 months. Ha ha ha. And, you know, it's kind of, it's really complicated.
It's a reality show in the making, right?
Yeah, and I think we need to be very suspicious of the way that this is presented for Western audiences to consume. And at the same time, there's a kernel of something there, I think, you know, that there are sort of ways in which certain kinds of work present opportunities to, you know, even just think, right? And reassess and maybe decide to divorce your husband. This has been documented, you know. I mean, yeah, but I think we need to kind of ask ourselves, is it right to always have a conversation about this thing, surrogacy, that doesn't include observations about just pregnancy as without any, just normal family, reproduction? Because what I am really interested in trying to do is sort of to blur that boundary and to show that, that there are sort of technologies of assistance at work in all, baby making, in a sense, and that there are also relations of outsourcing and, stratification involved in a lot of reproduction, right? We have maids, I wish. Sorry, I don't wish. I think there's complicated politics around that. But, in a class society, people hire reproductive labor from lower, strata of society. And that is something that, for instance, Kalindi Vora calls, vital energy.
I thought she said Carlin, and I was like,
almost mystical, but it's quite a materialist analysis. She sort of charts how families that are in the upper classes and echelons of our society become recognized as actually more needy and deserving of care, and that becomes so it becomes really naturalized, as though certain kinds of families that look a certain way actually genuinely need more care than do others, right? And this has sort of been studied and documented, and so all of that kind of vital energy for Kalindi Vora just kind of like goes up, right, to the cream at the top of the cake. And at the same time, I also think it's important to not kind of, so this is really subtle, but often, especially sort of good progressive liberals, will talk about how awful it is that, I don't know, a Filipino mother leaves her children behind at home to come and look after, the children of someone on the Upper West Side of Manhattan or whatever. And, it's not to say, yes, it is sad, no, it isn't sad, yes, it is right, no, it isn't right. It is very much a symptom of capitalists, geopolitics. The nuance that this wonderful scholar Laura Briggs brings to it is that there's also something quite normative about the assumption that by hiring the Filipina lady, we are sort of tragically depriving, and this, here again, I'm adopting the perspective of the consumer. It's really interesting how easily one slips into it, right? But the discourse is from that perspective of like, that kinship network in the Philippines is bereft of our lovely maid, and who is part of our family. And actually, Laura Briggs goes, to the Philippines and talks to children whose mom, has left and gone to New York to work. And they're like, oh, well, we have other ways of, but there are like all kinds of other mothers in our society. And, I wouldn't do the same thing if it was me, but it's totally cool. And she suggests that there's this kind of normative idea of family that also then leads us to judge other sort of situations as though we are also capable of destroying them, by virtue of removing their single mother figure. So that needs to be avoided too, if that makes sense, right? Like,
apparently, this is not about this. I'm just saying this for my normal audience in general. Apparently, Ben Thorpe went on Ethan Ralph to respond to me. And I know that because I just got like a notification on my phone to that effect. Ben Thorpe can go fuck himself. I have nothing to say to that guy. Anyway.
Yeah. I wonder if there are questions on the Zoom. Oh.
Already gone 25 minutes early.
Oh, really?
It's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's it. We made it through, guys. We made it through. Well, I mean, I have to say that bit in the middle where I was yelling at and banning conservatives for being ridiculous aside, I do think this was a pretty good stream. It always like the streams always get more lackluster in the back half than in the first half, but we got a lot of juicy nuggets in that first half, right? Sophie was peak Sophie. I thought it was great. Sophie was everything we wanted her to be. I always look forward to when we find a new Sophie episode on the internet. Yes. Thank you, Ginger Dragon. We love you. Yes, Sophie is the best. All right, guys. That is going to wrap it up for this episode of Socialism Saturday. But as a reminder, if you want to join us for movie night tomorrow in the supporter Discord, where we will be watching, against Jennifier's better judgment, Arachnophobia. We do movie nights every Sunday at 8 p.m. in my supporter Discord. The only way you can get access to that is by becoming a supporter on my Substack or my Locals or my Patreon, but mostly on my Substack. If you're going to support me on one thing, please have it be on the Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. That is my primary content hub on the internet. That's where you're going to get all my best stuff, all my best content, all my written work, all my clips, things like that I don't necessarily post to YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube thinking you're accessing all of my content, oh, no. Substack is the main content hub. That's where all the good stuff goes. And when you support my work for $8 a month or $80 a year, you do get access to a variety of perks, to include 2 Zoom calls every single week with me, to include supporter-only events like Spy Stream, to include access to premium articles on the Substack, and to include the supporter Discord. I will be sending out a newsletter tomorrow with just covering what I covered this week, and also sending out the information for the supporter Discord and for the Zooms for movie night. So make sure you are subscribed over there, and you will get access to it. And again, we are watching Arachnophobia tomorrow at 8 p.m. We watch a new movie every week. So if Arachnophobia is not your jam because you're afraid of spiders like me, stick around. We'll be watching another movie next week. It'll all be good. All right, guys, that is all I have for tonight. Thank you for joining me for another glorious episode of Socialism Saturday. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.